Congressional staffers, a lot of young men and women who work there at the Capitol and are never seen. I wish them well as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
About 3:45 on the East Coast, as you can see, this protest, whatever you want to call it, it's not a peaceful protest, as the demonstrators here have crossed barriers. They've crossed a line, and they are now breaching the United States Capitol, forcing the Senate and House to evacuate and pause in the middle of a cherished and sacred constitutional duty having to do with the peaceful transfer of power. Debate is one thing. Protest is one thing. That's not what we're watching here, Lester, and we'll continue to keep our eye on it.
No, absolutely. We understand that now from Tom Winter, one of our producers, one person in critical condition after being shot at the Capitol. At least 5 people have been transported to hospitals, including several officers who were treated for pepper spray exposure. 4 other people have been transferred from the Capitol as well. So we continue to watch that play out. And we certainly saw pictures a moment ago, still pictures of security officials with weapons drawn, trying to barricade a door. So the situation is extremely serious as it plays out right now. I want to go to Kristen Welker, who is at the White House. Kristen, I'd say all eyes of the world are trained on the White House, but right now the Capitol is the focus. But the answer could come from the White House. Are we getting anything beyond the tweets the president issued? Is there a growing chorus of calls for him to try to put a stop to this?
There is a growing chorus of calls. Lester, let me read you a tweet from Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, a little bit of breaking news here. She says, at real Donald Trump's direction, the National Guard is on the way, along with other federal protective services. We reiterate President Trump's call against violence and to remain peaceful. So there you have it. The National Guard has been deployed to Washington, D.C., to the Capitol to try to deal with these protests that are unfolding and this breach of the U.S. Capitol. Now, the messaging that we're getting from the White House, this is the latest from Vice President Mike Pence, who says the violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop, and it must stop now. Anyone involved must respect law enforcement officers and immediately leave the building. Similar language from President Trump in a pair of tweets that he sent out earlier, Lester, but his supporters believe that that just does not go far enough, that they want to hear from President Trump himself, that they want him to come out and address his supporters and tell them, bottom line, stand down. Let me paint the scene for you at the White House right now, Lester. You have White House officials who are huddled in their offices, who are watching all of this unfold. I spoke with one official who told me that the president is watching this unfold as well. Of course, discussions about whether or not he is going to speak, whether there will be some type of written statement. But at this point, nothing on the horizon. So I think you are going to see the calls grow louder for him to come out and address these protesters. Lester.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. NBC News contributor and founder of Punchbowl News, Jake Sherman, joins us on the line. Jake, I understand you are in the Capitol. What can you see? What can you tell us?
Well, I can see nothing at the moment, Lester, because we've been in lockdown. I'm just going to not say where because I want to protect our safety. But I've been covering this building for 11 years. I've never obviously seen anything like this. I usually can't get through security with my AirPods or my belt, and these people have broken down doors. This is a mob. This is not a protest. This is an armed mob, and this is despicable and really, really, really unsafe. And we're all very scared.
Did you, I know you're in lockdown right now, but have you heard any of the protesters nearby?
Oh, yeah. When I was at the beginning of the protest, I walked outside to see what was going on and walked past a floor up. I was standing elevated, and people were breaking down the windows to very, very large and very secure doors. They had a flagpole, and they were knocking through windows. We've heard banging on our doors. We saw SWAT teams with long guns walking through the building. I fortunately was not in the chamber. All of my colleagues and members of Congress who were in the chamber were taken out. We still, where I am right now, have not been evacuated from the Capitol building, but hope to be soon, frankly, because we don't have security like many members of Congress do.
Yeah. All right, Jake, stay safe, and we do hope we'll get you out of there as soon as possible. Savannah.
Hi, Lester. I want to bring in Senator Tammy Duckworth, who, of course, is a veteran herself, a wounded veteran, I might add. Senator Duckworth, were you on the Senate floor when this happened? How are you doing? Are you safe?
I am safe. I'm barricaded in a secure location. I was actually on my way to the Senate floor in the tunnels underneath the Capitol when the Capitol Police turned me around and had me go to a secure location. So I am safe with a couple of my staff members, and I've defended our Constitution for 23 years in their service, and now for 8 years here on the Capitol Hill, and I've never in my wildest dreams would I ever think that Americans would do this to our own nation's capital.
I mean, I'm sure you are seeing the images I'm seeing, the United States Senate, the floor of the United States Senate, the Congress being taken over by people who have breached barricades, who've gone past police, who are where they are not permitted to be. Have you gotten any kind of communication? I don't imagine all 100 senators are on a text chain, but have you heard anything from the leadership about the plan to get this back under control and what might happen in terms of the constitutional duty that Congress has today?
I am not. I've not heard anything directly from the Republican leader's office. I am getting information from my leadership team, who are following up on every one of us and where we are located, all the Democrats and those who caucus with us. Again, listen, I my entire adult life had defended people's rights to protest. And peaceful protest is something that I absolutely support. But this is a mob. This is a riot. These are people who are not practicing democracy. In fact, they are, doing the will of a wannabe tin pot dictator who lost the election. And this is no way for us to be running our country and really doing the work that needs to be done, which is fight a global pandemic and get working families back up on their feet again.
Senator, you're as tough as they come. As I mentioned, you are a wounded veteran who served our country, but was there any moment today when you were on your way to the Capitol and you were turned around in a rush? I mean, what went through your mind? Did you feel fear or concern or anxiety about your own safety?
I don't. I did not feel fear or concern. I did what the Capitol Police asked me to do, because that is the best thing to do, is just to follow their directions and to take myself out of the equation so that I would be one less person they would have to worry about, and that they could concentrate on their jobs and focus on those who were breaching the Capitol. I will tell you this. These protesters will not stop me from carrying out my duties as have been laid out for me in the Constitution. And if we have to be here all night and all day tomorrow and the next day, we will continue to carry out the work that needs to be done. And I'm not going to be deterred from standing my ground. I will not quit my post. I will be here, and I will do the people's business.
Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, thank you for calling in. Stay safe. Keep us posted. We'll stay in touch with you. Appreciate it. Lester, over to you.
Thanks. I want to bring in Hallie Jackson right now, Savannah, who is, of course, is our chief White House correspondent. Hallie, the president spoke to this crowd today. So much of what we've been hearing, of course, is that the inauguration will go on the 20th. Are there concerns that what's happening today could, obviously you can't move that date, but could have a tremendous effect on how we mark that day?
You can't imagine, Lester, that it's not going to, right? Or at least have a discussion or a conversation about that, given what we're seeing unfolding. I think to give people some perspective here, and remember, in inaugurations past, this is what happens. You have typically the president-elect on the west front of the Capitol. You have that sort of parade down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. Things had been changing and in flux very much anyway because of the pandemic. And by the way, it's a pandemic that is still very much happening and very much active currently. And the question now is, will this change even more on Inauguration Day, given the scene here, given the security and the safety perspective? One of the things that you have talked about, Lester, as you see these images, you said earlier you might feel sort of sick looking at that. It is stunning, I think, to people in this country, as well as to people in the international community. The head of NATO, the NATO Secretary General, calling these shocking scenes in Washington and saying the outcome of this democratic election must be respected. Lester, that is the kind of sentence that you hear aimed at other countries, not the United States. that you haven't ever heard aimed at the United States, to give you some perspective of the way that this is being seen and the way that it is being perceived and happening here in the United States and around the world as well. As far as the president goes, another one of his allies, again, more and more of his allies coming out now saying he needs to appear. There was a mention perhaps of, and we heard earlier some reporting, question marks, as our studios are kind of going off here, I'm just going to hang this phone up, question marks on whether the president would deliver, for example, a written statement, a speech. A written statement isn't going to cut it at this point. And frankly, Lester, I think there is also a fair question of whether a formal deliverance of remarks from President Trump is enough to stop what's happening here, to get these rioters, frankly, to turn around and leave the Capitol. We know now, based on the reporting from our teams, that the National Guard and the press secretary has confirmed that the National Guard is coming in. You have other states now, neighboring states here, Maryland, Virginia, sending in the National Guard as well. The change of mission has been approved, as you see on the screen. I think it is also important to note, as we talk about the process, Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania saying, we are absolutely going to get this work done. Logistically, Lester, that is going to be almost impossible to do anytime in the immediate term future because of this unbelievable security breach that has happened. You cannot send members of Congress back into a House chamber that hasn't been swept. You can't send members of Congress back into offices where people who have not been screened are there, not just putting their feet up on the table, but doing, you just don't know. And that is an enormous security breach, as now we see this remarkable scene of this line of cars, police vehicles, law enforcement vehicles, lights and sirens on, coming down. I can't quite get my bearings from this chopper shot here as to which angle we're looking at, north or south. But this is obviously the main drag here heading into the Capitol on the Mall. The backup is coming. That seems to be what's happening here, and it is desperately needed at this moment because you still have to get these protesters cleared out if you're law enforcement. Okay, and I see the perspective there, Lester.
Yeah, and of course, a 6 p.m. curfew is now looming as we watch more security descend on the Capitol, preparing for whatever may come. And we should also note, before I hand it back over to Savannah, those pictures we've been seeing of people occupying offices and parts of the Capitol. Those pictures are shocking, but it should also be noted they are potential evidence as well. Savannah?
No question about that for a later time, but right now we're still in the middle of it. This Capitol not under control, but in fact overrun by a mob of people. Let me get to Pete Williams. I think he's got some reporting on the law enforcement efforts here. Pete, what is the plan here, or what is beginning to be a plan?
Well, we know now that the FBI has been deployed at the request of Capitol Police to help. We know that Homeland Security is sending people, Homeland Security investigations, presumably. Obviously, you've got Metro Police from the D.C., the police department here, the local police department, in addition to the Capitol Police. We know that they've asked for assistance from the National Guard. So they won't at some point later lack for manpower to empty out the Capitol. And that's obviously the immediate chore here, is to get the Capitol emptied out, secured. They've got to go through all these spaces and make sure that they're swept and secure and that nobody else is hiding out inside the building. You're looking now at the House side of the Capitol complex. That's Independence Avenue, where traffic is being restricted. Police are using that as a sort of a staging area. And then you see the Capitol come into the view. That's the House chamber on your left, then the center, the rotunda, and that little sort of square section between the House and the rotunda. Inside there is Statuary Hall, under that curved dome with the little cupola on top. Under that is Statuary Hall. That's the old House chamber, and that's where you saw those dramatic pictures today of people streaming from the rotunda toward the House chamber, which is what now is just disappearing on the left side of the screen. And then the center part of the Capitol, and then on the right would be the Senate chamber. Obviously, that is the concern now, to get things squared away so that the counting can resume. You were talking about this earlier, Savannah. By law, by the Electoral Counting Act, it has to start today, but there's no limit in how long it takes. They'll keep going until they're done. And if they're not done by Inauguration Day, and I have no reason to think that they won't be, but if they're not, then there's procedures to have There's the Succession Act. The Speaker would become president temporarily until they can figure out who the president is, but which obviously will be Joe Biden. Now, on the law enforcement side, we've noted that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol by someone from law enforcement, not sure which agency that was. We've been told by law enforcement authorities that at least one improvised explosive device was found on the Capitol grounds, not inside a building, but on the Capitol grounds, and possibly a second item. We know that law enforcement people are looking at that. Earlier this afternoon, before we saw people storming the Capitol, the big concern was evacuation of the Library of Congress, which is directly across the street from the Capitol, and a portion of a House office building.
And Pete, in case we have not caught up on this note, Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary for the White House, said that the National Guard is on the way along with other federal protective services. And she says, we reiterate President Trump's call against violence and to remain peaceful, but we have not heard from the president, not recently, not within the last few moments, asking folks who are gathered there at the Capitol to call it off and to stop. Let me go to Casey Hunt. Casey, obviously, first question is always what's happening there behind you, but also I know we've heard from the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate now.
We have, Savannah, and they are calling for the president to do just what you said he has not yet done, which is to demand that all protesters leave the U.S. Capitol and Capitol grounds immediately. That is a joint statement from the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and the Minority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Now, I can also tell you, Savannah, that what has started today as fear, chaos, uncertainty about what was going on is hardening into resolve and determination to get the government back on track. So one member who is at the secure location where they've taken members of the House tells me that one Democrat and one Republican, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat, Liz Cheney, the Republican, informed those members on lockdown that the National Guard is on the way. There was applause in the room, and this member said to me that we will return to the floor and do our jobs, was the quote. I also heard from a member of the Senate who was also taken to the Senate side secure location. This member is safe. This member also told me that these thugs will not win the day, essentially, that they are prepared to go back onto the Senate floor. Senator Joe Manchin telling me we're all okay and ready to get back to our chamber and finish our work. These thugs cannot and will not run us off. We will continue to govern. And yes, Savannah.
Oh, I wanted to try to understand because, we just talked to Senator Duckworth. It sounded like she was in her office. Everybody wasn't, all 535 members of Congress weren't all there at the same time. But are there various locations where there are groups of senators or groups of congressmen sheltering together? Did I catch that?
Yes, that's right. So it's a little bit complicated, and it depends on where you were when this started to unfold. So we saw the joint session begin this process. Then the House and the Senate separated to their respective chambers, and they started debating this question. And it was during that point that protesters breached the Capitol, and they eventually, of course, breached the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. So because of coronavirus, not everyone is allowed in the chambers at the same time. Normally, of course, there are 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. All of them have a chair or a desk. But with social distancing, you can't do that. So that means that groups of members were scattered in different places when this all unfolded. Many of the senators had just processed back across the Capitol. They had started their debate in the Senate chamber. So there was I would say a higher proportion of the chamber was present over on the Senate side. And then you also had a bunch of House members still on the floor of the House. And as it unfolded, and we had the video, in fact, that you're watching right now is from Haley Talbot, who's our producer, who was inside the chamber as this was unfolding. She was with some members who were up there in the gallery. That's the level that's above the House floor as they were all being evacuated. So many of those members were taken together in a group to a different location in the Capitol complex. We happen to know where this one is, but we're not reporting it because obviously there are many security concerns about that. The Senate, meanwhile, had a similar situation. There were members on the floor who were evacuated together. So those members are also telling me, I've talked to a couple of them, I know they're in the same place. We don't know where they are, but we do know that they are safe and that a number of them are together. Then, of course, if you are a member who was not on the floor and not part of that escort from Capitol Police, you may be at any other place, your office building, your own personal office. So that's kind of how these things are set up here, Savannah.
Got it. Casey, got to jump. Let's listen to the President-elect Joe Biden.
Late coming out to speak to you. I initially was going to talk about the economy, but all of you have been watching what I've been watching. At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol itself. An assault on the people's representatives, on the Capitol Hill police, sworn to protect them, on the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. An assault on the rule of law like few times we've ever seen it. An assault on the most sacred of American undertakings, the doing of the people's business. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent, it's disorder, it's chaos, it borders on sedition, and it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much, and we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and will prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency. The renewal of the politics. It's about solving problems, looking out for one another, not stoking the flames of hate and chaos. As I said, America's about honor, decency, respect, tolerance. That's who we are. That's who we've always been.
A long time.
The certification of the Electoral College vote is supposed to be a sacred ritual.
Started thinking, man.
Which we affirm. Purpose is to affirm the majesty of American democracy.
I don't care about what's going on in the hood.
But today's reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile and and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good. Think what our children watching television is thinking. Think what the rest of the world is looking at. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we, the people, in search of a more perfect union, have kept our eyes on that common good. America is so much better than what we've seen today. Watching the scenes from the Capitol, I was reminded, as I prepared other speeches in the past, I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth." Went on to say, "The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless." The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor, and commitment as patriots to this nation. Notwithstanding what I saw today and we're seeing today, I remain optimistic about the incredible opportunities. There has never been anything we can't do when we do it together. And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America. There's never, ever, 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 ever been a thing we've tried to do that we've done it together. We've not been able to do it. So, President Trump, step up. May God bless America. May God protect our troops and all those folks at the Capitol who are trying to preserve order. Thank you, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
We've seen today President-elect Joe Biden calling on President Trump to step up, calling what's happening at the Capitol right now a democracy under assault, and calling on the president to go on national TV to call for an end of the violence we've seen in and outside the U.S. Capitol tonight. An extraordinary moment. Joe Biden actually making a few comments. Okay, as he departs the stage, enough is enough is enough. Joe Biden, who has at times during this period leading up to his inauguration played the de facto healer in chief, once again taking that role under circumstances that probably even he couldn't have imagined. What we're seeing today, supporters of the president who have stormed the U.S. Capitol, who have desecrated parts of the Capitol. We've seen it in a series of photos. Just before we went to the president-elect, we should note some other major news taking place, somewhat related to all this. NBC News now projecting that Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, will win the Senate runoff in the state of Georgia. And that leads to the projection that Democrats will regain control of the U.S. Senate. It'll be a 50-50 split. Vice President Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect, as Vice President, will have the tie-breaking vote. So that just breaking here a few moments ago before we went to Joe Biden. Let's go back to Hallie Jackson right now, who can give us some more insight as to what is happening there in Washington as the light begins to dim.
As it begins to get dark here, Lester, I can tell you that it appears we are going to be hearing from President Trump at some point in the coming hours. I am told just moments ago by a senior administration official that the president will have a taped message coming shortly. Presumably, of course, one would imagine, to address the chaotic, difficult, mob-like scene that we have seen at the Capitol, outside and inside, as we're playing now some of that video from earlier of the protesters storming the steps. We still do not know. I have no clarity on remarks, for example, the content of those, what specifically the president might say. But you have to remember, he has had people close to him, people who are his Republican allies, publicly now call on him to do something. Not just Joe Biden, right? Not just what we heard from the president-elect, who is ending his remarks and very clearly saying, time to step up, President Trump. It appears we will hear something from the president. Of course, Lester, this could go in various directions, right? Presumably, you have to think that the president will, in fact, call on these now rioters to stop, to abandon this so-called mission, to turn around and to leave, particularly now as we are coming within just, an hour and 45 minutes of this curfew happening. So that's one piece of it. But Lester, this is also a president who, over the last 2 weeks, it can be said fairly and objectively, has worked to spread misinformation repeatedly about the election's results, repeatedly calling on his own vice president to try to, in my words here, mess with the results of this Electoral College vote count. The vice president does not have the authority to do that. The president has repeatedly insisted he has won states, specifically, for example, Georgia, that he did not win in this election. The president has repeatedly insisted that he is, in fact, the person who should legitimately be inaugurated, take office, continue to keep office after January 20th. That is not accurate. That's not true. That's not correct. That's not what's happening. The president may have a platform here with the world watching him to continue to make those false and misleading and inaccurate and troubling claims. We talk about the world watching, Lester. I have to tell you, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, is reacting to this as well, calling what you're seeing on the screen now disgraceful scenes in the United States. He's continuing that the U.S. stands for democracy around the world. It is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. You now have international allies of the president calling on the president to give up the fight, basically, to give up the game, to say that it is over. And Lester, I think that is perhaps the only thing that is going to get these people out of the Capitol. And I have to tell you, I'm not even sure that that is 100% going to do it here. Time is of the essence. And so we will, of course, be watching to see when that message, again, as I'm being told by a source familiar with that message, will be taped and will be coming out soon, Lester.
Yeah, you've covered this president for a long time, and he doesn't retreat. He doesn't give ground, no. And so that makes you wonder: is this a case, Hallie? Be careful what you wish for. Could he perhaps inflame the situation any further? We've all been through those circumstances where he's about to make live statements, and we have to be very careful what we air because of his propensity to tell untruths.
And I think that's the point here, Lester, right? And I do think I had it in my head as I was watching President-elect Biden's speech, basically, throwing down and saying, Mr. President, you need to address the nation. I do think, based on President Trump's past patterns, it is possible that there could have been an entrenchment for the president. He is somebody who can fairly be called a defiant leader, defiant even in the face of what seems to be the logical and the correct thing to do in a political situation, much less a national security situation as we are seeing now. And I have to tell you, the shot that we're looking at that's coming in, stunning. I believe that is the area where the press goes down onto where the Senate chambers are. It looks like that is the workspace with people. It looks like National Guards officers in there, at least some sort of law enforcement officers with long guns. It is a disturbing sight. But I think you're right, Lester. I think that the president is going to use this platform for something, right? The something is still a question mark.
Yeah, Hallie, thank you. Let me turn it back over to Savannah.
Well, let's bring everybody up to date. It's 20 minutes after 4 o'clock here on the East Coast, and what you're witnessing is, I think, fair to say, unprecedented. Throngs of protesters turned mob coming and breaching the United States Capitol at the very moment it was performing a sacred constitutional duty, certifying the Electoral College in order to implement the peaceful transfer of power in our democracy. We've just heard from the Vice President, former Vice President Joe Biden, President-elect, who will take office in 2 weeks. He said democracy is fragile. and we're seeing that today. And he called directly on President Trump to get on camera, to get on television, and ask his supporters to call it off, to stop, to give up the game, and to retreat peacefully from the Capitol. As a law enforcement matter, we have not seen the Capitol Police or any of the other law enforcement agencies who have been called in to assist them come in an aggressive way trying to clear these protests. Whether they should or shouldn't is probably something that is a matter of debate right now. As we speak, members of the Senate and House there in Washington have been told to shelter in place wherever they are, whether it be their offices or in the matter of those who were on the Senate floor or on the House floor when this took place, when those demonstrators breached the Capitol, were taken to a secure location, which we cannot reveal. Some of them are together. And in fact, we have reporting that those senators, the group of senators who were together, watched the President-elect Joe Biden's speech together. We also have been informed by one of our reporters on the scene, Kelly O'Donnell, that Vice President Pence is still at the Capitol because it is simply not safe for him to return to the White House. That is the situation in Washington right now. One woman has been shot. It appears to be a protester. That the shot reportedly was from law enforcement. She has been taken to the hospital. We don't have an update on her condition. And that will bring you up to date. Also, an IED, that's an improvised explosive device, according to NBC News, was recovered on the Capitol grounds. Let me get to Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming. Congresswoman, you, of course, were an outspoken opponent of the tactics that we saw in terms of the politics, whether the Electoral College vote should be objected to. So you were one who said, it's time now, the election is over, and it's time to perform our constitutional duty. So just so we know where you stand on this, but let's just get to what happened today. Where were you? What did you see? And how are you?
Fine, Savannah. I'm not going to talk about where we are, but we were on the floor of the House of Representatives performing our constitutional duty to count the electoral votes when we had to be evacuated. And we are in a place with bipartisan group of members, and my Democratic counterpart, Hakeem Jeffries, and I have both made clear that we do not intend to allow this kind of mob violence to stop us from carrying out our constitutional duty. Our institutions have got to be defended and protected. We have an oath to the Constitution. Sending an angry, violent mob to disrupt proceedings at the Capitol cannot stand.
When you say sending a mob, who do you believe is responsible? Who sent the mob?
Look, the President of the United States called his supporters to Washington, D.C., and has dispatched them without telling them to stop it. Now, I believe he has spoken out in the last few minutes, possibly, but we live in a republic that is governed by the rule of law and by our Constitution, and this cannot stand, and it won't stand. We will carry out our constitutional obligation. We'll count the electoral votes, and we all need to remember. We all need to come together. That the republic, the future of the republic, depends upon Americans standing as one, abiding by the Constitution of the United States. We do not bend to mob rule. We don't bend to political threat. There comes a time when our elections are over, and we have to carry out our constitutional duty. And that's the moment that we have arrived at now, and we're going to continue to do that.
Congresswoman, I'm sure, like all of us, you're looking at these images. I mean, the one we have on right now, somebody sitting in the chair where the Senate president presides over the United States Senate, and here's some protester sitting there. Now we've got another shot of some protester sitting in an office with his feet up, literally with his feet up. This is the United States Capitol. This is sacred ground in our democracy. What goes through your mind when you see these images?
Well, it is infuriating, and it's heartbreaking, and it will not stand. We are a democratic republic. We have survived for over 240 years, and we have had the peaceful transfer of power. The peaceful transfer of power is something that, Ronald Reagan talked about that in some instances we take for granted, but it is miraculous. And I think that what we've seen today is that it is something that is very fragile, but that we all must stand for it. The president should immediately make clear that this kind of activity, of violent activity at the Capitol, has to stop. And he ought to make clear that, he will abide by the results of the Electoral College vote, and that he will ensure the peaceful transition of power.
Are you, and there will be plenty of time to analyze this later, but just in the moment, as you sit there, sheltered in place, locked down with fellow members of Congress, are you disturbed that this was able to happen at all? That security was such that a group of protesters turned mob could come in and breach the United States Capitol? It isn't as though this wasn't advertised. I mean, this has been boiling and being planned for days and weeks.
Yes, I mean, it obviously is a terrible day in the history of the Republic, but I think what's important to make clear is that we are strong, we're resilient, and we have bipartisan dedication and commitment to protecting and defending the rule of law and to protecting and upholding our oath to the Constitution. And
Congresswoman, forgive me for interrupting, but the president has tweeted, now I'm told he didn't. He's about to tweet a video statement. Now, he had been urged by members of the Republican caucus, including senators and members such as yourself, to say something. I think they're telling me we've got this video statement from the president. Can we roll it? Let's go.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Well, that was the statement from the president released via Twitter. Congressman Cheney, I think you're still with me. I mean, here you are. You're on lockdown. Was that good enough for you? He's telling folks this was stolen from you. This was awful, but go home now. Do you think that was the kind of statement that will get the job done?
Look, the president of the United States should have, before now, made clear that he wasn't going to countenance any kind of attack or violent activity like this. And, it is good that he has asked people to go home, but what has happened today is unprecedented in American history. And when you have violent mobs storming the floor of the House of Representatives and the floor of the United States Senate, and the president's response is to say that he loves those people, it is absolutely counter to the Constitution and counter to the peaceful transition of power and the values on which this republic was built. We have oaths that we have taken to the Constitution, and we got to uphold those oaths. And
and Congresswoman, I mean, even more than that, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying, but is it going to get the job done? In other words, is he talking out of both sides of his mouth? He's saying, go home, but you were robbed. You have every right to be angry. This was a fraud. This was stolen. I mean, he's doing two things at once. And the goal here, I think, of the statement, I think what those of you in lockdown right now who would like to get about your business and go on with your day, is there's one goal, which is get this thing under control and get the mob out of there.
Look, there's no question about that, Savannah. We have very deep and clear political differences in this country, but we don't resolve those differences by mob violence. And it doesn't matter what side of those issues you stand on. The President of the United States statement now, in my view, was completely inadequate. What he has done and what he has caused here is something that we've never seen before in our history. It's been 245 years, and no president has ever failed to concede or agree to leave office after the Electoral College has voted. And I think what we are seeing today is a result of that, a result of convincing people that somehow Congress was going to overturn the results of this election, a result of suggesting that he wouldn't leave office. Those are very, very dangerous things, and he will be remembered. This will be part of his legacy, and it is a dangerous moment for the country.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, stay safe, keep us posted, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Savannah. Appreciate it.
4:30 on the East Coast here as we watch what's unfolding at the Capitol. Lester, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, Savannah, I want to bring in Andrea Mitchell right now. Andrea, your thoughts on what we heard in that video tweet from the president? As is often the case with him, he doesn't retreat. Did he pour water or gasoline on this fire?
I think he poured gasoline on this fire, a fire that he himself set. His former communications director hours ago, Alyssa Farah, tweeted, "You need to condemn this." That was hardly a condemnation. He said, "I love you." He again said that the election was stolen, that it was fraudulent. He repeated all of these lies, and then he says, "I love you," and go home peacefully. That's hardly going to get these people. That's not a condemnation. It's not going to get them out of a building that they barged into. They are an unruly mob. Weapons have been found. At least 1 or 2 shots were fired. People have been injured. They've stopped the democratic process. Lester, I worked up there for years. I know those corridors in that building and love that institution, the House and the Senate, as flawed as it is, as gridlocked as it has been, as much as we criticize it. But for the process of democracy, of counting the electoral votes to be stopped in its tracks, and for people to be hiding under their desks and grabbing their gas masks on the floor of the House and in the Senate, and for the people, for the vice president and the people in succession, for continuity of government to be taken by Secret Service and Capitol Police out and put in secure locations for their safety is simply shocking. I am as shocked as any other citizen who loves our country and loves democracy, and especially someone who knows the people up there and has worked with them and our own colleagues up there. I just want to say the irony. Here's a statement from the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, a government that is, just run by a dictator where people are jailed, journalists and people who are democratic protesters. "We follow the events in the USA with concern and invite the parties to calmness," the Speaker writes on Twitter. "We believe that problems will always be solved within law and democracy. As Turkey, we have always been in favor of the law and democracy, and we recommend it to everyone." This is just a continuation of a government run by this president, his Secretary of State, who have embraced dictators, ignored human rights, ignored the jailings of protesters, women and others who've been tortured in jail in Saudi Arabia. And now we see mob rule in the capital of the United States. It is beyond shocking.
Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thanks very much. We are about 90 minutes from the curfew that will go into effect at 6 p.m. Eastern time in Washington, D.C. The light already beginning to fade there as there seems to be no break in where we are in terms of what we've been seeing on the front sides of the Capitol. No movement for people to leave or to remove them, and at the same time there is still business for this Congress to do, to exercise and fulfill its duty to count the electoral vote and essentially confirm this election. I am going to begin preparing for NBC Nightly News. Will be going on the air in a few hours. I'll leave it in the capable hands of Savannah Guthrie, but our NBC News coverage will continue. Savannah, we'll send it to you, and we'll see you in a bit later.
All right, we'll see you on Nightly, Lester. A couple of developments. The FBI SWAT team has now entered the Capitol complex, and our reporter on the Hill, Leanne Caldwell, has tweeted some video of that. So there seems to be some movement on the part of law enforcement to start to get this thing under control. Lester mentioned the 6 o'clock curfew. So while we're talking about law enforcement, let me get to Pete Williams. Pete, bring us up to date, because the governor of Virginia said that requests had come in for the National Guard of Virginia to come in and help. We know the FBI is on the scene. What do you know about what law enforcement is there, what's being brought to bear, and what the plan is here? Because it does seem like we've been in this state of suspended animation where members of the House and Senate are in lockdown, but yet this situation is definitely not under control.
Right. So the Senate and House members are safe and secure. Our understanding is the president of the Senate, is still actually in the Capitol complex because it wasn't considered safe to get him out of there yet. So they're all hunkered down in secure locations. As more law enforcement agencies start to come in now, obviously job one will be to get the place emptied out, get everybody out of there. And then job two will be to start looking through the building, making sure that everyone's gone, that all places are safe. They'll have to sweep the rooms and make sure that there's nothing left behind. 2 improvised explosive devices were found not in the Capitol, but on the Capitol grounds, like pipe bomb-looking devices. They're being disrupted. We don't know whether they're actually working or hoax devices, but they're simply destroying them. So for those reasons, it's going to take a while. And I just talked to a member of the Senate leadership to say, what are you going to do? Are you going to wait until it's safe to go back into the House chamber? That could be 24 hours. And the answer was, and this is being discussed right now on the leadership of both sides, my understanding is, the sentiment up there right now is, we're not leaving. We're going to stay here and do our jobs, even if it means doing it from the 2 secure locations. We know what they are, but we're not reporting them for obvious reasons, where the House members and senators are. So there's, at least right now, the feeling up there is, let's keep going. Now, the Constitution.
Well, that's interesting.
Say,
wait, Pete, so you're saying, I just want to make sure I'm catching that, because that's, I mean, some of these senators are together, presumably enough for a quorum, since these were the senators who were on the floor. You're saying they might want to just keep it going before this is even under control? They're just going to keep going?
Yes, or at least some point soon. In other words, not wait until the Capitol Police get the whole place cleared out, the whole Capitol swept, and declare it safe for the 2 chambers to come, to be in operation again. Because that could take, as I say, 24 to 48 hours, I suppose 24 hours, to get that, get the House and Senate floor ready for people to come back. But the senators right now, because what I asked this member of the leadership is, what are you going to do? You're going to go home and come back tomorrow? And the feeling was, no, we're going to stay right here and resume our work. Now, I started to say, there's no requirement in the Constitution for where they do this. It just says that it shall be in the presence of the Senate and the House, so the counting. So it could be anywhere. Now, there is a federal law, the Electoral Count Act, that says that it has to be in the House chamber, but they're, exploring ways around that statutory requirement. It's not in the Constitution. So all I can tell you is that right now there's a feeling of, let's not leave. I would describe it as sort of defiance, that we will not be cowed by this outrageous intrusion into the Capitol. They're determined to keep going. And the person I was talking to said, when this was suggested in this group of senators that are in the secure location, there was applause.
Wow. Well, that's a fascinating reporting from inside. Wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall to see what's happening? Because in that area, in that secure location, are senators who, of course, are on both sides of this issue of whether the Electoral College vote should have been objected to at all. And here they are all together because of this mob that descended on the Capitol. So, and we've heard that sentiment from some of the members that we've talked to on the phone, Pete, saying, if I have to be here all night, we want to get this done. This is our constitutional duty. We heard Tammy Duckworth, a decorated U.S. veteran who lost her legs in combat, saying, nothing will stop me from performing my constitutional duties. But your reporting is pretty extraordinary, Pete, that they are even considering doing it right where they sit, not waiting for the Capitol to be clear, that they seem quite determined to do so. Stand by there, Pete. Keep us posted. Casey, over to you on the Hill. I know you're plugged in. You're our Capitol Hill correspondent. What are you hearing in terms of the security, but also in terms of what the plan is now for the business of the Congress?
Well, Savannah, I'm hearing a sentiment similar to what Pete was just reporting out here, that what had started off today as chaos, some fear, uncertainty, is moving into resolve. An insistence, Joe Manchin told me to not let these thugs take over, that they are going to return to their work. And there are some logistical questions about that, but remember, there are contingency plans for things like this. I mean, we've never necessarily imagined this exact scenario, but in the wake of September 11th, they had to, of course, evacuate members of Congress. And there are a couple of locations in this complex
from, like, Homeland Security?
where potentially, and Savannah, I'm not sure, I can hear you in my ear. Our viewers
Oh, sorry, that was me.
hear you as well.
Casey, I'm sorry. That was me talking to the producer. Sorry,
Yeah,
carry on.
of
I
course.
apologize.
No, of course. So there's an auditorium in a newly built area of the Capitol complex that is large enough to hold people. And again, I want to be careful how I describe things because we are, of course, worried about the security situation. But there are contingencies for the House and the Senate to operate in rooms that are different from what we traditionally think of as the Senate and the House chambers. So, well, yes, obviously the building itself is of incredible symbolic importance. I think that this feeling that they need to do the work no matter where they are or what the circumstances are is very important. So to them, and they are starting to express that now. So we're also starting to hear more questions about, are the Republicans who helped kick this off by saying they would object to this count still planning on doing that? And it's a little bit hard to get answers because everyone is separated from their bosses. There is so much confusion. But again, it does seem like the plan here is to try to go forward. I know there was a brief discussion about trying to evacuate senators from the location where they are using buses. That plan seems to be on hold for the moment. One of our producers saw microphones going into the secure location where the senators are, as though they may be setting up for something where they would be able to talk to reporters that would involve, because again, remember, this debate is supposed to be public as well, and that is an incredibly important feature of the way our government works. And I think that there is also a desire on the part of members of Congress to be seen carrying out their jobs, to demonstrate to the American people that this is what they need to do. And the other thing, Savannah, that I would just add, we're asking for reaction to the president's video. The problem with the president's video, based on some of the people that I have spoken with, is that he doesn't repudiate the basic reality that Joe Biden won the election. Instead, he gives additional credence to what these protesters are here saying has happened. And while he did say that they should leave the building, he did not in any way condemn the message of the disingenuous false message that has prompted them to show up here in the first place. So I think there's some concern among members of Congress that what he did doesn't help the situation, as many of them have been calling for, but instead will potentially make it worse. Savannah.
That exactly, and that was the reaction, the fast reaction of Congresswoman Liz Cheney, that it doesn't go far enough if you, on the one hand, say go home, but at the same time you're pouring fuel on the flames by saying that you were robbed, it was stolen, the election was stolen, and that it was fraudulent. That is not what many Republicans have asked the president to do at this moment of crisis in our country. They've asked him to be clear and unequivocal that it's time for the peaceful transition to a new president, as our Constitution and our democracy requires. Let me get to Ellison Barber. She's our correspondent. She's in Washington. I believe she's outside the Capitol. Yeah, hi, Ellison. Ellison, what have you been hearing?
Hey, Savannah, yes, so we've been watching just in the last little bit here as we've seen police on this opposite side of the Capitol start to use more tear gas on the crowd that is gathered over there. Not tear gas, we believe it. It seems to be some sort of mace or pepper spray that they're using on the crowd there. We had been told that some of those protesters were possibly breaking windows, and that's what led to the use of that pepper spray. You can see right over here, we're starting now to see Capitol Police gathering here. They seem to be huddling, discussing, possibly getting ready for something. But all evening since we saw those barricades first come down as protesters rushed to the front of the Capitol, Capitol Police have largely kind of stood back. We've seen them kind of waiting up on different parts of the steps there as the protesters made their way up closer. You can see people standing on an armored vehicle here holding flags, the American flag upside down, a Trump 2020 flag just underneath it. About 10 minutes ago, we were up closer to those stairs and somebody came on a bullhorn, a protester, saying that President Trump says that we should go home. He wants you to go home. Other people in the crowd pushed back on that person, and he said, I know, I understand you want to be here, but he's saying that we should go home. Another person then got on top of that armored vehicle and started yelling at people through the bullhorn to come back. So for now, it seems like there is still a large group of people here who do not have any plans to leave in the immediate upcoming future. I mean, this group, it is not as big as it was a couple of hours ago, but there are still people on these steps who seem to have no plans to leave anytime soon. People that we have seen come out claiming to have been inside the U.S. Capitol. They are greeted kind of as heroes by the crowd here when they come out and they talk about their experience inside. And we saw some people actually following, kind of tracking closely behind a few police in riot gear, calling them traitors for whatever happened inside the U.S. Capitol and berating them as they made their way across the front here. Savannah?
Ellison Barbara, correspondent on the ground there outside the Capitol. I want to go to a news conference underway now. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., who's called a 6 o'clock curfew for the Capitol, so let's listen in.
This afternoon, I announced a citywide curfew for the District of Columbia beginning at 6 p.m. this evening, going until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. During the curfew, no one is allowed to be outside in public places other than essential workers, which includes credentialed media engaging in essential functions. As you can see from video images, the unlawful behavior inside the United States Capitol building. I continue to urge all Washingtonians to stay home and stay calm. And if you see something, say something. But above all, stay home. The behavior that we are witnessing is shameful, unpatriotic, and above all, it is unlawful. Anyone who has engaged in these activities, continues to engage in these activities, will be held accountable. There will be law and order, and this behavior will not be tolerated. The Metropolitan Police Department has been deployed to assist the United States Capitol Police in restoring order to the Capitol, and our Chief of Police will lead the command to clear the Capitol building and establish a perimeter around the Capitol. I have requested both the Virginia State Police and the Maryland State Police to deploy officers, and they have engaged immediately to deploy officers to the Metropolitan Police Department to help regain control of the United States Capitol. I have also invoked several days ago a standing mutual aid agreement with our surrounding jurisdictions, and I want to thank them for deploying. Those jurisdictions include Arlington County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, as well as Baltimore City. We want to thank them for sending their officers in assisting us with public safety in the district, as well as the response to the United States Capitol building. Additionally, I want to acknowledge and thank the New Jersey State Police, who will also be assisting the Metropolitan Police Department. So with that, I want to turn to Chief Conte for a situational update. Secretary of the Army will make comments, and we will take brief questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Bowser. My name is Robert J. Conte III. I am the Chief of the Police of the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. As you are aware, demonstrators came to our city this morning to exercise their First Amendment rights and were largely concentrated in the area of the National Mall. Following the president's remarks, a large crowd began to march eastbound on Madison Avenue Northwest and Constitution Avenue Northwest. As the demonstrators approached the United States Capitol grounds, there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. They breached the fencing along the U.S. Capitol grounds and confronted police lines surrounding the building. MPD was requested by the United States Capitol Police to provide assistance with crowd management, and due to the violent behavior towards the police officers there and their intent on gaining access to the Capitol, a riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police to force entry into the United States Capitol building. As you are aware, they were able to gain access to the Capitol building, and I can confirm that one civilian was reported to have sustained a gunshot wound inside of the Capitol. Details of the shooting are not immediately available, and the situation remains under investigation. The Metropolitan Police Department will be taking the lead on that investigation. MPD continues to provide personnel resources and assistance on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol and has requested the assistance of law enforcement partners through a previously in place mutual aid agreement. As you heard from the mayor, a 6 p.m. curfew has been put in place tonight and will be in effect until 6 a.m. tomorrow, January 7th. We are advising everyone that is not engaged in essential activity to get off the streets and adhere to the curfew. If you are found to be in violation of the curfew, police will be required to take action. Again, I want to reiterate and make it clear, please abide by the curfew that the mayor has set in place, or people will be subject to arrest. Lastly, I know that many of you are familiar with the Metropolitan Police Department. Understand that there is no better agency in the country to handle First Amendment events. They happen on a regular basis here in our city. However, today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior. And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable. We can take any questions that you may have after the Secretary has a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, Chief Conte. At around 3 o'clock this afternoon, we mobilized the D.C. National Guard to 100% strength. We'll have 1,100 personnel that are convening to the Armory as we speak to support Metro PD and reestablishing the safety and the confines of the U.S. Capitol. We'll also be working with other federal law enforcement entities that are going to be coming here to the Metropolitan Police Station to add additional support and capability as they continue deliberate planning and look into how a clearing operation will be conducted. Thank you.
And how does this work? This phone? Okay. Okay.
Evan, do you want to say his name?
Evan?
Yeah, hi, Mayor and Chief Conte. Could you please speak to the confusion surrounding the deployment of the National Guard? We understand that the council put out a statement saying that originally the Department of Defense.
We've been listening into a news conference from the mayor of Washington, D.C. and several officials, including the head of the Metropolitan Police Department, and with their plans on how to get this under control. The National Guard in D.C. has been activated, as we just learned. The Metropolitan Police Chief was very clear that what had started as lawful demonstrations quickly escalated as a group of protesters came close to the Capitol. He said that violent behavior toward police unfolded, including the firing of the irritants, some kind of irritants toward police, which allowed them to breach the fence and the police line. And according to the chief of police, a riot was declared. He said this town is very used to people coming and protesting and exercising their First Amendment rights. This was not that. This was a riot, according to Metropolitan Police. And we're learning a bit more now about the plans to get this under control. It involves National Guard, it involves FBI, it involves the Metropolitan Police Department, it involves the Capitol Police. We've heard word of the Virginia National Guard being called in, or at least requested. We'll see if we start to see some of that personnel. Let me turn to Janet Napolitano for purposes of the discussion here, former Homeland Security Secretary in the Obama administration. And Secretary Napolitano, first of all, just your thoughts. I mean, you aren't near Washington, I don't think, or not in the Capitol, but when you see these images and what has unfolded today, as a former Homeland Security official whose job was to protect the homeland, what do you think?
Oh, it's a dark day for our country. And, you know, when I was Secretary of Homeland Security, we did all kinds of scenario planning for attacks on the homeland. But this is akin to an attack from inside the homeland on the functions of our democracy, on our government. Like I said, it is a dark day.
I mean, when you see that the Senate and the House have to be evacuated, that the session has to be stopped, it is an extraordinary moment. And I, of course, don't want to ask for any inside information, but if you could help us as the former Homeland Security understand, you know, what kind of planning is underway for this kind of situation. Perhaps this couldn't be imagined, where American citizens, our own people, would storm the Capitol and put in danger members of the United States Congress and their staffs. But certainly an attack on the Capitol is something you would have had to contemplate in your past job.
Certainly, and there are procedures in place for what's called continuity of government to secure the members of the House and the Senate should there be an attack. These were procedures developed in the wake of the attacks of 9/11, as a matter of fact. You know, it's interesting to me, however, and there'll be after-action reports on this up the wazoo, but it was very foreseeable that there was going to be tremendous protest activity in Washington today, incited by the president himself. And one has to question what kind of pre-event planning went on. Certainly the presence of law enforcement now is arriving, and they're absolutely essential, and we absolutely need them. You know, I'm just comparing it to the way law enforcement handled the event at Lafayette Park last spring, when the president dispersed peaceful protesters to go do his photo op at the church, you know, holding the Bible. It's a pretty stark contrast, and I think it illustrates a lot about the current administration.
What did you think of the president's remarks? Was that sufficient in your mind to quell the violence, to calm it, to call it off, and to try to get this under control?
No. You know, the president lost this election. That result has been confirmed by every court that has considered the dozens of challenges. The electors have been selected. The votes have been certified by the states. By the way, it's the states who run elections, and it's the states who certify electors. The purpose of today's convening of the joint chambers is almost ceremonial in nature. It's to receive those certified votes, to open the envelopes, and to count them. That's it. It's not a place of objection or allegations of fraud. That's the courts of the United States, and the courts have ruled. So this is over. And what the president should have done is to say that he respects the rule of law, he respects our processes, he respects that on January 20th, Joe Biden will take office as the president of the United States, and these protesters, and I'm almost reluctant to call them protesters. It's really a mob. But they should disperse and go home. And by the way, those who have committed acts of violence, broken windows, etc., they should be identified and prosecuted.
Well, the head of the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C. called them rioters. Secretary Napolitano, thank you for being with us. Yeah, it does seem in the case of those who breached the line and trespassed into the United States Congress, where the public is not allowed. Yeah, that seems an apt description. Thank you, Secretary. I want to say that we've been watching this image on the Capitol grounds, and it does look like some people are being escorted out now by law enforcement. And I want to go to Ellison Barber, who's there. What are you seeing? What's your vantage point?
Hey, Savannah. Yeah, so we saw these police officers in riot gear make their way up the U.S. Capitol steps and started to talk to some of the people that were still there and have gotten them to go down the steps and clear that area with them. There was not a huge group on the steps at the time that the police came up. A lot of people in this area have left, and they say they're heading up to the Supreme Court. But they came out in riot gear and were able to kind of slowly push people back off of the steps now down to this area. And it seems like everyone has left as they were asked to. Right before this happened, we did hear someone go on a bullhorn, we were telling you earlier, and say President Trump has said that people should go home and tell people here that they should go home. Some people disagreed with that and pushed back. But obviously, as the police have come out in their riot gear here, at least on the steps at this part of the U.S. Capitol, the people who were up there have come down now. And I don't know if you can see some of, if we can walk a little this way. We don't want to get too close, but I don't know if you can see some of what's been left on these cars that are over here. People have put up signs as they had this is really the first time this area has kind of been cleared out today, but you can see some of the signs on the cars back there saying things like Pelosi is Satan. People have been standing on top of that car, that armored vehicle in the middle for most of the day. They have now come down, though, and it seems like perhaps Capitol Police, for the first time in quite a few hours, have started to get back control of this area. And for now, they're standing up there. Some people you can see standing in front of them with the join or die flag, not leaving entirely, but they have backed them down from up near the front of the door where they had been for so many hours now. Savannah?
Ellison, you said somebody got on a bullhorn and said President Trump said to go home. Was that law enforcement or was that a fellow protester? Who said that? Could you tell?
That was a protester, Savannah. They were actually like kind of in the middle of the stairs, and they came on and they said President Trump posted this. Somebody else said no. He said President Trump said he doesn't want any violence. They yelled, "We're not being violent." Then somebody else, disagreeing with the person telling people to go home, stood up on top of that black armored vehicle and started yelling at people who were leaving to come back, saying that they needed to fight, that they needed to do this to be patriots and to come back. Some people stayed. A lot of people, though, dispersed. But it was interesting to see because they kind of went back and forth within their own group. Some saying, okay, maybe we should go home. Others saying, no, absolutely not. And we do know that a lot of the people who were here, as well as on the other side here on the Capitol, where we did see people getting pepper sprayed pretty frequently in the last hour or so, they have started to leave. And we've been told by other protesters here that they are making their way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is just across the street here. Savannah.
All right, Allison, thank you so much. Stand by there for us, would you? I want to get to Kenneth Buck, who is Colorado's congressman, a Republican, a Trump supporter. Sir, first of all, how are you? Oh, we can see you. That's good news. How are you doing? Are you safe?
I am safe. My staff is safe. We are hunkered down with another office, and we are safe, anxious, and happy that we can see the TV and see what's going on in the Capitol.
Well, Congressman, if you're in your office, I presume you were not on the House floor when this unfolded. What was your vantage point? What was your view of the events as they unfolded from where you sat?
Yeah, I was on the House floor. I was one of the people set to speak, and so I was sitting on the House floor. First thing I saw was the Capitol Police, plainclothes Capitol Police, escorted the Speaker from the chair. We continued with the proceedings for a few minutes. The Capitol Police then came on the House floor and announced that the doors had been locked in the chamber and everybody should stay in place. About 10 minutes later, we were told to put on our gas masks, and a few minutes after that, the windows of the doors around the House were being shattered. It was hard to tell whether it was gunfire at first or whether it was just a glass breaking, and it appears now that it was just glass breaking. And a bunch of us got heavy furniture and started barricading the doors to help the Capitol Police. Soon after that, probably about 15 minutes, we were told that they anticipated that the House chambers would be breached and asked us to evacuate. And so we evacuated through the tunnel.
I mean, what you have just described, Congressman, is so extraordinary. You describe it in a very matter-of-fact way, but could you have imagined when you woke up this morning that something like this could have happened? What was going through your mind? Here you are about to perform that sacred duty, addressing the House floor as an elected member of Congress, and then this happens.
Yeah, I anticipated that there would be violence outside the Capitol. I did not anticipate there would be violence inside the Capitol. And I really, peaceful protests, we've seen them for months in this country, and we've also seen terrible violence. And the violence that happened in the Capitol and the people that trespassed and caused damage and caused harm to others should absolutely be prosecuted. And it's incredibly aggravating and disturbing that as a country that believes in free speech and believes in the Republican form of government that we have, that we are forced to tolerate this nonsense. It is absolutely unacceptable.
You heard the president's remarks. What did you think of them?
I was glad that the president instructed his followers to leave, go home, and peacefully disperse. I think that it is time that we anticipate a peaceful transition to the next administration. And I hope all Americans understand that while many of us are frustrated with some of the processes in this election, the results of the election stand, and we need to respect those results.
Congressman, stand with me, but I am showing an image that I believe to be a live picture where we saw some smoke and perhaps flashbang. So there does seem to be some action on the grounds there where you sit, and we'll keep our eye on that. But let's keep talking. You talked about the president. He made the statement. He did tell people to go home. At the same time, he said, I know your pain. I know you're hurt. He said this election was stolen from us. It's fraudulent. And he called these protesters, some of whom have, as you well know, breached the United States Capitol and forced Congress to evacuate and disband and not be able to perform its duties. He said they were special people and he loved them. So I ask you, I know you're a Republican and a supporter, but I mean, was that enough for you?
I think the Attorney General Barr made a very strong statement. I think there were other strong statements that have been made, and certainly you can look at the president's statement. I think in totality, he was calling for peace, and he was calling for people to disband. You know, I am frustrated right now where I'm sitting that I can't do more. I pray for these police officers who have put their lives on the line, and I just hope that these protesters and those who are in the building, I would consider them criminals. I hope they go home. I hope they understand that there will be consequences for what they've done.
I mean, do you feel angry? It's a violation. It's here you are, the member of Congress, and the Congress convening to perform this duty that's in the Constitution, age old as our democracy itself. And here come a bunch of folks coming in and putting a stop to it.
Absolutely, I'm angry. This isn't the way that this country operates, and it is a disgrace, and it's a disgrace for anyone to tolerate anybody to come in and try to shut down our government. It is absolutely disgraceful.
Oh, sorry, I was just about to wrap you up because I want to get to those live pictures, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Final thought.
Final thought is, God bless America. I don't have much else to say.
God bless America, indeed. Sir, thank you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I do want to go to these pictures. This is the west front of the Capitol, and you see the smoke is building, and this being a live situation unfolding. I don't have a ton of information about what exactly has transpired, but you see the flash there. Sometimes a flashbang is used by law enforcement to try to disperse a crowd. It's obviously one of the tactics in their tool belt, and it seems we saw the FBI SWAT team come in earlier. Brian, I think no question that they are trying to bring this now to an end and say it's enough. Time to try to clear the Capitol and get back to business. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent who covers law enforcement. Pete, you have a more trained eye for what we're seeing here, and you certainly have sources inside the law enforcement agencies. What do you see?
Yeah, I can't really be sure where the flashbangs were being set off, whether it was there on the portico, I guess you would call it, or not the portico, but the balcony or whatever that is, outside the Capitol or inside. But there was certainly smoke that blew. It did appear to be a smoke grenade or a flashbang, and not the deployment of a chemical irritant like tear gas. But you know, from this low vantage point, it's hard to tell whose it was. I assume it's law enforcement's. The reason I'm somewhat unsure is that we've been told that several, possibly more than 2 improvised explosive devices have been found on the Capitol grounds. I would think if it was something like that, people would be scattering, and they're not. So that leads me to believe that it probably is law enforcement. And if the intent of it is to get people to move away, it's not having an immediate effect. But I think the other thing that's interesting in this picture is the number of law enforcement people now. We're finally starting to see a definite show of force, a large deployment. All those yellow vests are, I assume, law enforcement or at least people, official people that are trying to get that crowd moved out of there. So we're starting to see a much bigger deployment. We know that other law enforcement people are coming. They're coming from nearby states. We've just been told that the New Jersey State Police are now sending about 50 people. The FBI's there, the Secret Service there, Homeland Security. Just about every three-letter law enforcement organization in the D.C. area is there. And, you know, I think one of the questions is going to be why has it taken so long to get them there and to kind of coordinate how this is going to work? It does seem, Savannah, from all the pictures we've seen today, now people seems like they're definitely being pushed back. From all the pictures we've seen today, it does seem like the word had gone out early on to the people who were in the Capitol at the time, the law enforcement folks, the Capitol Police, Metro Police, to the extent that they were there, not to confront, not to have any violent confrontations, but to avoid that as much as possible.
It sure seemed that way. I mean, Pete, when you saw people just streaming through Statuary Hall as though it were, you know, a high school tour, and no one stopping them, it definitely seemed that was a tactical decision. That's the picture earlier.
Well, and you see that the Capitol policemen just sort of standing at the side, I guess, two of them waiting for instructions or something, but they may have well made the calculation that those two were not going to stop those people and that there wasn't much they could do, and that but by letting them go through and letting them get into the building, of course, we now know what happened. And so there are going to be lots of questions about this. Some law enforcement people are already pointing to a letter that the mayor sent yesterday to the acting attorney general, to the acting secretary of defense, and the secretary of the army, saying, we have all we need for tomorrow. This was yesterday. We have worked with the Park Police, with the Capitol Police, with the Secret Service, and don't send any other federal law enforcement personnel in without checking with us first, because we don't want a situation where there are people deployed and we don't know who they are or who's in charge. So some of the federal officials are already saying, you know, they kept us at arm's length, and that's why it's taking so long to get these people out. Now, you know, we're going to have to wait and see how this all comes together, how that actually played out.
This being Washington, Pete, we'll be sure there will be investigations, commissions, and tons of finger pointing and blame shifting, so we can look forward to that in the coming days. But at the moment, we're still in this crisis. These are live pictures from the United States Capitol. If you're just catching up, it has been truly an unprecedented afternoon in which protesters turned into rioters, crossed the barricades, went past police, reached the United States Congress in session, performing its duty of certifying the electoral vote for the next president of the United States. We're able to infiltrate the Capitol, the Senate floor, the House floor, ceremonial offices, sit in office chairs literally with their feet up. And now at this hour, about 10 minutes after 5 o'clock on the East Coast, we are starting to see a little more of an aggressive move from law enforcement to push back these protesters. We saw the FBI SWAT team go in. A few moments ago, we saw smoke, some flashes of light. We have reporters on the ground. We don't want to surmise what those might have been and at whose hands, but perhaps some tactics to try to get this crowd out. We heard from the president-elect, Joe Biden, in a live address to the nation, calling for the restoration of peace, calling for President Trump to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol. And President Trump issued a video on Twitter saying that it was time for them to go home. He also, though, said the election had been stolen from them and was fraudulent, but he said it was time to go home. And that is the state of things as we speak. Let me go to Casey Hunt on Capitol Hill. Casey, there's still important matters for Congress to conduct. The last we checked in with you, these members of Congress were still being told to shelter in place. Vice President Pence at our last knowledge, was still on the United States Capitol grounds because it wasn't safe for him to go back to the White House. That information's a couple hours old now. But is there a plan? And Pete Williams had reported from a source inside one of those Senate hold rooms, one of that Senate shelter-in-place rooms, that there were senators discussing whether they could just conduct their business from that undisclosed location and just carry on the business of the country anyway, with a somewhat defiant attitude. What are you hearing now?
Yeah, I've heard similar, Savannah. I've talked to both House and Senate members, or texted with them, I should say, as they've been trying to figure out what to do. And the first step was to wait for this law enforcement presence to show up, which they clearly have, and the process of that is underway. There is a long list of agencies. Pete walked through some of them that are here that we have seen in the hallways. I mean, it is extraordinarily surreal to see FBI SWAT teams running through hallways that are supposed to be secured, that are supposed to be our corridors of power, literally, where they have been overrun by these rioters and are no longer able to actually exercise that power the way our Constitution says that they should be able to. So you're looking at some of it here. I mean, I never thought I would see anything like this coming from what your last guest was just talking about, a threat from the inside, the former Homeland Security Secretary. This wasn't an outside attack. So yes, there are still questions. We know that their members are still huddling in these undisclosed locations and trying to figure out how to proceed. Senators actually have the Electoral College votes with them in this undisclosed location. I'm told that a Senate staffer actually was the one who thought to grab them. And remember, this is a pretty old, arcane process, the counting of the Electoral College votes. And think back to when they would have put this law in place. I mean, Pete Williams called it the oldest, one of the oldest functions of our government. They would have been bringing these certificates from across the country on horseback. They would have been concerned about whether the people charged with getting them to the right place were able to survive their journeys. I know it may sound dramatic, but that was the circumstances that they were dealing with. And it's part of why the law is written to send several copies of these certificates out there. But what it means is that those physical items are imbued with very important characteristics, right? They come here, they open, this is what Congress is supposed to do. They open the envelopes, they read the numbers, they figure out what they say, and they put down the official tally. And yes, we don't necessarily need to do it that way now in the age of the internet, but that's how we do it here in the country. So the physical manifestation of those is very important, and somebody just grabbed them on the way out and took them to this secure location, Savannah.
Well, you know, I think that's actually quite poignant, Casey. I mean, it's not just a matter of ceremony, or in some ways it is, but at this really dark moment in our country, it calls into mind our history, and that this democracy, this only, few hundred years old, is fragile, as we've heard many of our leaders say today. And that notion of somebody just grabbing those electoral votes, which of course represent the will of the people and the voters who came and exercised their precious right to vote, it actually, I think it really puts things into sharp relief at this extraordinary moment in our country. And Casey, honestly, there are probably folks tuning in here who are just living their lives. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have an actual crisis going on, a health crisis in our country. And now there's this crisis that did not have to happen. To catch people up who may have not been following this as closely as you do every day, this Electoral College vote that was to take place today, there was no suspense about the outcome. The votes are in, they've been certified, the legal challenges have been mounted, they've been rejected, recounts have been requested, the recounts have happened, the audits have happened. All of the legal remedies that could be exercised had been exercised, and this was supposed to be just the final moment where it's almost like a rubber stamp, where the electoral votes are read and certified, and then in 2 weeks we have an inauguration. Bring us up to date on what a core of Republicans were trying to do today and what the ramifications of that are.
Savannah, as the morning unfolded, I came into the Capitol as usual, and there were some protesters around, but frankly, protesting is a pretty common thing here in Washington. I've seen a lot of it. It's not usually an issue. It didn't seem abnormal or out of the ordinary, but the process that was about to be undertaken here today was from the start of the day historic. We were expecting to see and did see an objection to the counting of the Electoral College votes. And normally this only takes about a half an hour. This is, I believe, the fourth one of these that I've been up here for. It's the first one I even really remember, although I remember seeing the mahogany boxes go by in past election cycles. But of course, President Trump had urged his supporters to question the integrity of the election, to try and fight back. Stop the steal is the phrase that they have been using. And while everything got off to what seemed like a normal start here in the building, the objection was made. The way the process works, all members of Congress were together in a joint session. Once the objection was made, they were to separate to their respective chambers. This is all laid out very carefully in the law. Each chamber was to debate for 2 hours this objection and then take a vote on whether or not these Electoral College votes were properly cast and should be counted. And we know that there were Republicans, many of them prepared to vote that no, those electoral votes should not be counted. However, Mitch McConnell actually opened the debate on the Senate floor by saying that it was time to put this all behind us, that if, in fact, they continued with the objection to the counting of the votes, to certifying President-elect Joe Biden as the president, that our country would end up in a death spiral. That was the phrase that he used. Our democracy would end up in a death spiral. And just moments later, we saw protesters, rioters rushing the Capitol, eventually breaching both the House and Senate floors, now leaving us with lawmakers in hiding, unable to conduct the business of the country, and an uncertain outcome in terms of how law enforcement is going to finally put an end to all of this. Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you. Let's take a pause right here. I'm going to turn the coverage over to Chuck Todd, our political director, host of Meet the Press, to carry it on. We'll check back in with you, Chuck, in just a couple of moments. I'll send it to you.
All right. Thank you, Savannah. Let's go now down to Vaughn Hilliard. He's on the west side of the Capitol. Vaughn, paint a picture for us. What are you seeing right now? Tell us what's going on.
We're looking at a 6 p.m. curfew. Essentially,
Vaughn, it is. Yeah, Vaughn, we hear you. I know you're talking. We got tough audio, and this has been tough all day. I get that. Let's. Why don't we see if we can fix that? Let me go to Yasmin Vasugian, if we can. If Yasmin, actually, let me move there. Let's go to Igor Bobek. He's Igor Bobek. At the Huffington Post, and if you've been on Twitter and seen some of the first early pictures of what was going on inside the Capitol, it was courtesy of pictures from Igor Bobek. So Igor, you were there in the first moments when this breach, it appears, occurred. Take me through the scene there when it all first started to happen.
Thanks, Chuck. Well, I was in the middle of reporting on today's certification vote for the 2020 election when I heard a commotion, I heard yelling, and I ran down to the first floor of the Senate where I encountered, I was stunned to encounter a group of protesters trying to make their way up the steps into the Senate, to the second floor of the Senate. And I saw this police officer courageously try to hold them off with nothing but a baton, but was ultimately unable to do so. And the protesters chased them up the steps where there was a sort of a standoff, and right steps away from the Senate floor. These protesters were carrying Confederate flags. They were yelling traitors. They were saying that, they needed to stop this from happening in order to make Trump president. Really just shocking scenes. At one point, a few of them got into the Senate chamber itself and got up to the day where Mike Pence was presiding minutes earlier, to take photos and to scream that this was Donald Trump's election. It's really stunning scenes.
Igor, I'm seeing you've caught some pictures. There clearly is some Capitol Police that was there at the time. Were they aggressively trying to push them back, or did they feel overwhelmed, or what could you observe at the time? How are the Capitol Police handling what they had? Were they just overwhelmed?
I think initially they were overwhelmed and unaware, frankly, some of them, that protesters had gotten into the Capitol. I took this video of this lone police officer trying to hold back this group of 15 to 20 protesters and finally receive backup yelling that, they've gotten in. When he did receive backup, they tried to de-escalate the situation, tried to talk to them to calm them down, but ultimately they would not leave and eventually roamed across the Capitol into the rotunda and into the Senate chamber itself.
Igor, are you safe? Where are you right now?
I am safe, thank you. I'm at a secure location. I'm outside the Capitol. I'm holding here, and we're all trying to see what comes next tonight.
Well, Igor Bobek, thanks for sharing your photos with the world, getting us these photos. There's a lot more we need to unpack with this. You stay safe, and of course, thank you for your brave reporting. Let me bring in Hakeem Jeffries. He's a member of the Democratic leadership, Democrat from New York. And Congressman, we got a report that you and Congresswoman Liz Cheney had been sort of reassuring the leadership and reassuring members that this process is going to go forward, that these terrorists are not going to stop, if you will, this process. Do you have an idea of when the Capitol is going to be safe for your return? Yeah, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, are you with us, sir? It's my understanding we have you on the phone. Can you hear us? There we go. Congressman. Okay. Well, let me check in here with Hallie Jackson and see what we're hearing inside this West Wing right now. Hallie, is anybody getting through to the president?
Well, I think the clearest evidence that at least the president did something, and there will be a lot of discussion of what that something was that taped message that we heard from him just within the last maybe hour or so. Clearly, there had been people coalescing around the president. His allies were very public about this. Even some of his closest Republican allies very publicly on other networks, on Twitter, were saying, you have got to say something. Some of the most forceful comments came from the president's former communications director, a senior official inside the White House, inside the West Wing. Her name is Alyssa Farah. Chuck, her name might be familiar to Beltway insiders. She used to work for Mark Meadows, who then became the chief of staff. And she issued this sort of impassioned plea saying to MAGA country, I am one of you, and this is not okay. This has to stop. You have to go home. The president has to speak up about this. We obviously heard that statement from him that, said, sure, go home, but in the next breath said, we love you. You're special. I understand you're hurt. This election was stolen. It, of course, was not stolen. This is a crisis point for President Trump. He has now cleared the sort of bar of speaking publicly, right? The bar that was sort of set by his allies, by people like President-elect Joe Biden. But this is a president, Chuck, as you know, who is defiant as a personal defining characteristic and trait of his, right? And so what does he see? And importantly, Chuck, what is he hearing in the coverage of what he's seeing? This is a president who is at times and rather frequently influenced by some of what he hears in the media from, for example, media allies. And so that is something, the president, he is very visual. He watches television. That's what he's doing now and how he's getting this images. We have, and our White House team reaching out, obviously working sources. What's he being briefed on? What's happening? We heard from the press secretary when the National Guard was activated. I think in the eyes of some critics, that took a little too long, right? We were watching these images for a while before it became clear that the National Guard would be going in. But now it seems like there's a little bit more action. There's a little bit more movement. But I have to tell you, it's getting dark in D.C. This is a point where law enforcement has to get a handle on what's happening here. And then there's a question of what the actual process is, Chuck. The whole process we were talking about, the Electoral College count, moving forward. How does that unfold? I've talked to another source on the Republican side whose hope was that some of these Republican senators, specifically, who had objections, would perhaps think twice before doing that and before pursuing that, given what we've seen unfold.
I would think that at least Mitch McConnell is going to attempt to have that conversation with Mr. Hawley and probably Mr. Cruz, among others. I think we have Vaughn Hilliard's connection now better for us. And Vaughn, Hallie just brought up an important point. The sun is setting. The sun essentially has set in Washington, D.C. Vaughn, what do you see out there, and do you feel the law enforcement presence yet?
Chuck, I think you just heard part of the law enforcement presence. There hasn't been a serious effort except for the last 15 minutes here. We are just a half hour away from the curfew here in Washington, D.C., and you can see some of the lights flashing up towards the Capitol. It was just about 15 minutes ago, Chuck, that the first tear gas was dispensed. You've seen flashbang grenades. Over the course of these last hours, what you saw were thousands of individuals as this insurrection took place here at the United States Capitol watching. You can see over to my left, our great photographer, Paul Rigney, is behind the camera here. And this is what you have seen here over the course of the last 15 minutes. It's a systematic push to push people away here from the scene. You saw Capitol Police work their way down and pick individuals up one at a time physically from their seats up on what is the inaugural platform. That platform is typically not there. Right. It's just been constructed in the last weeks. That is where members of Congress, former presidents, members of the president's family sit during the swearing in of the president of the United States. This is where Joe Biden should be sworn in just 2 weeks from now. But what you have seen over the course of these last hours is thousands of people hold firm here at this very moment here. And now what you're seeing is tear gas and smoke being used to push people back. I got to tell you, Chuck, one gentleman just came up to me right before we went live to you. He said, if our voices are not heard today, you'll hear our muskets tomorrow. Again, there is no police presence outside of the Capitol Police that you see up literally on the steps of the Capitol. We've been here for hours. There was a medical emergency, and there was frankly nobody to turn to. There's questions of at what point does the National Guard come in, but literally the shot that you are seeing up on the United States Capitol is the extent of the police presence here at the heart of the United States. And it's been quite a sight to see. Again, we're just a half hour away, though.
So you have not seen...
You're from that curfew
Vaughn,
here, and you're seeing that first effort here from the police.
So you're not seeing any public police sort of where you're behind your cameraman right now. That is not there. They are not trying to disperse from there as well, or are you we see some, are we seeing riot gear? I think he may have caught something there.
You're seeing the push here from the police that have been dispersing that gas and the smoke there. You actually see that police line, I should say, as we're watching this in real time with you here, Chuck, pushing people down. Those are the steps.
There it is.
That's the walkway, I should say, from the United States Capitol down here to where you see essentially hit the National Mall that leads you over to the Washington Monument. And again, this is literally the first police presence that you have seen pushing people here away. I guess you could say there was maybe more than 10,000 people here earlier today, and it was the likes of Congressman Mo Brooks, Chuck, who literally took the mic at that rally that the president appeared at earlier and said, today is the day that patriots will begin taking names and kicking ass. And what you have seen here is essentially thousands be able to take over these grounds, and not until the sun went down, finally a pushback in an effort to disperse these individuals here on January 6th.
I'm noticing I'll be honest, it's still sometimes, and I was watching this all day as well. We were on Capitol Hill. We've gotten a bit safer now, but there's not a lot of urgency. It feels. And it doesn't feel these protesters think that they have to leave anytime soon.
No, the ground was essentially ceded to them here. The streets of D.C. have been essentially all but quiet except for these protesters that have been walking about here. There was a sign that was up attached. You saw not only Trump 2020 hanging from the scaffolding here of the United States Capitol, but there was another sign off to the left, another from one of those structures that was built for Inauguration Day, in which it said, "We the people," and it said, "We will bring D.C. to its knees." And today they did. They stopped this process from going forward here. They essentially locked down the U.S. Senate. They locked down the U.S. House. Yeah. And it was a law enforcement presence that was not prepared. And the question is, at what point will these I hate to use this language, but essentially this last stand be kiboshed here. Again, a half hour away, but you still have at least 1,000, 2,000 people up here, up here on the west end of the U.S. Capitol that are holding firm. It's a matter of what does this next half hour look like, and what does the Washington, D.C. look like tonight and also tomorrow.
The curfew, you keep referencing it, 27 minutes is when the curfew hits. Vaughn, stick around. We want to keep your shot up. Pete Williams, I want to bring him back. Pete, you've got a better idea of what we've seen some pictures. They clearly are trying to do some disbursement. We know that there is an FBI SWAT team in the Capitol. What is happening right now that we don't see?
And a National Guard movement on the way should be arriving there shortly, we're told, and then they'll coordinate and begin to push people out, do a final clear of the building and get them off the grounds. That's the overall plan. Meantime, Chuck, back inside the Capitol, I just talked to a member of the Senate leadership who said that they haven't decided yet whether they will try to do this. First of all, they are determined to continue the count tonight. They want to keep going. They're defiant. They want to make the point that they can't be stopped. The only question is whether they do it in the secure location, which is outside the Capitol building, but on the Capitol grounds where they are now, where most of them are. The leadership is in a separate place. That's McConnell, Schumer, and Chuck Grassley, who's the president pro tem, as well, we believe, as the vice president, who we think is still up on the Capitol grounds. The question is whether they would do it in their secure locations, or would they try to go back to the House floor or back to the Senate floor. So that's question one. Question two is, when they resume, what are they going to do? They have to finish and vote on the objection to the Arizona ballots that was what caused them to go their separate chambers in the first place. I'm told that the objecting senators are now meeting and deciding whether to simply say, okay, that was enough, we made our point, or whether they also want to object to the votes from other states when this continues. But the mood that I got from this member of the leadership reflecting what this person said was the view of all 97 senators who were there is, we're not leaving till we finish.
And so do we have a sense, and do you have a sense from your law enforcement sources, when do they think they could get operational control inside the Capitol?
I don't think they have any idea, because they have to make sure it's clear. They have to sweep it for potential explosive devices. And that's not just, being prudent. There were a number of explosive devices or potential explosive devices found outside the building on the Capitol grounds today. I just don't know how many, but more than one or two, I'm told. And whether they were all working or not, I don't know, but they're taking no chances. So, that would take a while. They don't know how long that would take, and that's why they haven't decided whether they'll just try to pick it up where they are. They've all been fed. They're safe. The mood is generally good but defiant, and so they're waiting, I think, trying to get a read about how long it would take. I don't think anybody knows how long it would take to get the Senate back in shape for them to go back.
Right, and have they thought about, you said that they were thinking about they might do it in their secure location.
Right.
I assume they would want to publicly record that in some way. Is that something they've thought about, how to sort of make sure it's in the public record, I guess?
I wondered about that too, because I think they haven't gotten around to that, is the sense I got. I mean, obviously when they're in the Senate and House floor, we have the facilities to be able to hear and see what they're doing. I suspect they don't want to do this in secret. They want it to be, they want to show that they're doing the work. And I think that's one of the reasons why they thought about wanting to go back to the Senate chamber.
Yeah, Pete Williams with an important update there, and noting that it is a defiant group of United States senators, at least, that want to get this done, and that maybe the objectors are going to talk about standing down. We shall see. Let me go back to Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, we're seeing more live shots there. It definitely looks like there. I think I know that guard gate where those stairs are. Looks like finally a police presence is taking at least some control of some part of the Capitol.
Chuck, what you're seeing here is the police line here that pushed people away here. Finally, you're dealing with about a final 1,000 or two here right before us here. I'm going to have Paul just turn around here if we couldn't just get a shot of the U.S. Capitol. Yep. and they're asking us to move out, Chuck, and we will. You can see where the U.S. Capitol was, and you see this is Metropolitan Police Department here.
Yep.
Just a half hour until that curfew, finally pushing people back here. And again, though, there's still about 1,000 or 2,000 people up near that scaffolding of the inauguration platform that still are there. As to how those individuals are going to be pushed back, I'm not sure. But what you're seeing here is those Metropolitan Police Department going back and systematically pushing people back here, Chuck.
Are you seeing, how uncooperative are some of these protesters being, or are they starting to listen to the police?
When you use tear gas and flash grenades and pepper spray, it forces one to become a little bit more, or a little less resistant here.
Coming out. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you.
But again,
right,
I just got to put into context
go.
here, you know, there was at least, I think there was at least a 10,000 or plus outside here earlier here when there was essentially no police operation to be seen. But then what you see now is maybe 1,000, 2,000 people here for sort of this final last stand as the police department pushes people back.
All right, that's Vaughn Hilliard outside the Capitol, where he himself is also getting pushed back a little bit as they try to gain some control. Vaughn, please keep safe. Let me check in with Leanne Caldwell, one of our congressional correspondents. She, of course, is inside the Capitol. So, Leanne, any updates? What are you hearing internally about when they think they're going to have control of this building?
So, Chuck, the lockdown is still in place. I am in one of the House office buildings where I've been relegated for most of the day ever since the evacuation started. I was in the Cannon House office building, which was the first to be evacuated this afternoon, right when the proceedings began over in the House floor, in the House chamber. So what I just saw walking down the hall was a big contingent of Capitol Police officers moving. Of course, they don't tell you where you're going. And they did say, though, that the lockdown is still in place. As far as what is happening now, it seems like the Capitol is mostly empty from staff. Everyone we know has been removed and escorted from the Capitol into other places of the Capitol complex. So we don't have good eyes at this point on what is exactly happening inside the Capitol. But, you know, this is just something that is, you know, many people have said this on air today, that has just been unheard of, unseen here. I've covered the Hill for a long time. I'm aging myself, but I was actually in the Capitol during 9/11. And had to evacuate the Capitol then. Back then we were told to go outside. This time we are told to stay in and we can't leave the building. But Vaughn Hilliard just talked about Mo Brooks, one of the people who were leading the opposition here inside Congress, this Electoral College vote count. Well, he put out a statement just moments ago, and in that statement, and as Vaughn said, he was at the Trump rally earlier today telling people to go and kick some asses. Well, in his new statement, he goes on, he has a little bit of a change of tune to say, I'm sorry, I'm pulling it up right here.
Take your time.
He says, while our election system has major systemic flaws, that he says socialist Democrats egregiously exploited in 2020, he goes on to say that election system is still far and away the best place to change the direction and destiny of America. So he doesn't say if he is going to continue to object and once they resume this process, but he does have a bit of a change of tune from what he had just hours ago when he was riling up the crowd. And I will say one more thing, Chuck. I am talking to a lot of sources who, you know, Republican sources who even want to make sure that this is completed, that this process in the House floor is completed.
Right.
And some of these members who were opposed to it say it's going to be very interesting to see which ones continue to go forward with their objections.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really hard to justify it at this point. Leanne Caldwell, I'm glad I get you on to make sure your family knows you're all well and safe as well. So, Leanne, thank you. Let me go back onto the street on the outside of the Capitol. That's where Yasmin Vasugian is. Yasmin, tell me what you're seeing from your vantage point right now.
So Chuck, you and I spoke a couple hours ago. Since then, it was really chaotic. Now things have dialed back a little bit. The D.C. Metro Police, they've managed to push the protesters all the way off the Capitol Hill lawn. So just a couple of hours ago, as we were broadcasting, right, there were thousands of folks. I mean, you could see them up on the Capitol Hill steps. They were trying to breach the Capitol. They got inside the Capitol, as we well know. But then we saw those flashbangs, we saw the tear gas being dispersed, and they were trying to push those protesters, those rioters off of the Capitol Hill steps. We were there to see it all. We saw these major flashbangs coming out of the Capitol building, and then the police and the Capitol Police, along with the DC Metro Police, they began to push the rioters and the protesters back off of the Capitol Hill steps gradually. And this is kind of formulaic for them. This is something they do. This is something that we've seen throughout the summer with all the protests that happen with Black Lives Matter movement across the country as well, in which they form these police signs. And I'm going to step away and let Miguel shoot it for you. They form these police signs lines that you see behind me of DC Metro Police, and they gradually push the protesters and the rioters back to retreat from the Capitol Hill building. And that's what they've been doing for the last hour or so as we creep closer and closer. I don't know what time it is right now. It's around, we're hovering around 6 p.m., which is when there's going to be the curfew in place for the D.C. area, as the mayor said a little bit earlier. But gradually, with this police line behind me, they've been pushing the protesters and rioters back for the last hour or so. In which more protesters and more rioters disperse. I mean, we've gone from thousands upon thousands, Chuck, of people that were out here on the mall to now just a couple of hundred. And I will say they are getting in the face of a lot of these DC Metro Police, confronting them, angry with them, but the police are kind of maintaining calm for now throughout this entire thing. So we're watching it develop. It has been quite a couple hours, Chuck.
Yasmin, I'm curious. I know you've had interactions with some of these protesters and some of these rioters. What are they saying? How are they responding to now? I think they now see they're a pretty negative symbol for America right now.
Gosh, it's interesting. You know, earlier today, the 3 questions I asked were this. I said, why are you out here? What do you want to see happen? What do you want the vice president to do in addition to that question? And my 3rd question was, why aren't you wearing a mask? Because amidst 350,000 folks that have died in this country, a lot of folks are not wearing masks here. And I thought it was an important question to ask folks, and they felt like it was an infringement upon their personal liberty. That's what a lot of the people have been saying to me out here. The answer to the first question is they feel like the election has been stolen, when we well know that that is not true. Secondly, they wanted the vice president to step up, as they've said. They said the vice president needs to turn this election. The vice president needs to change the results of this election. And I mentioned to them that ahead of the joint session, the vice president put out a letter essentially saying that he doesn't have the authority per the Constitution to overturn the results of this election. And they said, well, that's not true. We believe he actually has that authority. Later on, as we talked about the folks breaching the halls of the Capitol, I said, is this what you wanted to see happen? When you got inside, what did you actually want to do? I talked to a man who was able to breach the halls of the Capitol, who actually got inside and then was pushed back by the Capitol Police with tear gas. And he said to me, I just want things to change. I just wanted to get in there because I want things to change. I feel like this election was not fair. And then he went on to say this, Chuck. He said, this is all we can do because we feel like the election was stolen. I said, but someone's been hurt. Someone's been shot. Do you still feel like it's warranted? Yeah. And he said, yes. And I heard that from a lot of folks, which is quite frankly, very troubling, to say the least. And then he went on to say this, Chuck.
It is.
And he said, next time it might be worse, and that's tough. Yeah.
Well, sadly, that person who's been shot, we now know has died. And so it has even gotten deadlier. Yasmin Vasugian, thank you. And I believe my pal Savannah Guthrie is back. Welcome back, Savannah.
Thank you. And with that disturbing news that the person who was shot earlier at the Capitol has lost her life, let's go to Pete Williams, who's collecting more information on that. Pete, what can you tell us?
Well, we still don't have the identity of the woman. We're told that she was shot in the chest earlier this afternoon inside the Capitol by someone in law enforcement. but we haven't yet heard whether that was U.S. Capitol Police, who are always on the scene, or whether it's someone from the city police department, known here as the Metropolitan Police Department, whether that was who was responsible for firing the shot, nor do we know where inside the Capitol building the shot was fired or why, whether it was in the process of defending the House of Representatives from the people who were trying to smash their way in or what. But the person was shot, taken, aid was immediately rendered. She was taken to a nearby hospital, and a short time ago, we learned that she has died, and I'm sure we'll get her identity here in a little while.
All right, Pete, thank you so much. Let's go back outside and see what's transpiring there. Yasmin Vasugian, our correspondent on the ground. Yasmin, what are you seeing now?
Yeah, hi, Savannah. So, just listening to you guys talk about this woman who has been shot inside the Capitol halls, and unbelievable to hear that. Nonetheless, we're getting pushed back further and further. As I was talking to Chuck a little bit earlier, the DC Metro Police basically set up a line here, and this is formulaic for them. This is something they learn how to do, right? This is the way that they push protesters and rioters back in situations like this. This is how they disperse crowds. We've seen this over and over again in situations like this, as we saw over the summer with the Black Lives Matter protests, and they're doing it here again, and it's working. I mean, there were thousands upon thousands of folks in the mall area throughout the last couple of hours. We saw people breaching the Capitol building a little bit earlier. There's nobody up there now. It is completely emptied, completely quiet, and DC Metro Police have managed to push everybody back with, every couple of minutes. They basically form a line and push everybody back. Since we saw the tear gas used on the Capitol steps about an hour or so ago, since then we've really seen no more tear gas or flashbangs used to push and disperse the crowd. Instead, it has been this lineup of DC Metro Police. They came in just about 30 to 45 minutes ago. We saw them come in from both sides of the Capitol and set up this lineup. And with that, the rioters and the protesters did begin to disperse. So it seems as if so far, because we're just minutes away from this curfew coming into place, that so far the residents of Washington and, of course, the protesters and rioters are heeding these calls for this curfew, because so many people, it seems like, have gone for now, right? But so many of the folks that I've been speaking throughout the day have said to me, essentially, this is not the end. And they want to see change happen. So it's really just a matter of waiting and seeing, Savannah, what's coming next.
Yasmin, thank you. Be safe out there. We're about 9 minutes away from the official start of the curfew in Washington, D.C., this extraordinary measure that the mayor there has had to put into place because of the riots that we saw today at the United States Capitol. Let's go to Casey Hunt. Casey, I understand there's been an announcement of some sort at the Capitol.
That's right, Savannah. We heard over the loudspeaker something of a buzzing siren type noise, and then you could hear a loud announcement that informed everyone here of the curfew, saying that the curfew's in effect at 1800 hours. That's, of course, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. All individuals must leave the U.S. Capitol complex or be subject to arrest. So we're, as we have said all day long, in the Senate office building, the Russell Senate office building, which is across the street from the U.S. Capitol. So we heard it here in Russell. Now, I'm not sure exactly how it would have been communicated to crowds outside the Capitol. Our reporters there obviously would have been the ones to hear that. But if we heard it here, that would indicate it was also broadcast throughout the Capitol system. There is an alert system that's built in here. We hear them from time to time for drills, or if there are, on occasion, there are suspicious packages that prompt an evacuation of an office building or something along those lines. But of course, this is the message that's being delivered here about 5:50 or so p.m. to everyone that's at the Capitol, that the curfew is in effect and that if they don't leave, they will be subject to arrest. So as we've been reporting, a number of different law enforcement agencies on site here, this announcement suggests to me they may be stepping up arrests as they start to try and get a handle on this situation. And Savannah, I also want to circle back to something that we've been talking about throughout the afternoon, and that is this determination to get the business of our government back back underway. And I would say at this hour, I'm still texting back and forth with a number of members, both of the House and the Senate, as they try to figure out what those plans are. And I do think that we should expect that determination not to falter. I think the plans are still in the works, and I think that everyone seems to be in agreement in both houses and on both sides of the aisle that it's very clear that a message be sent to it's very clear to them that it's important that a message be sent to Americans that the government will continue to function even in the face of this. So stay tuned for more developments on that front, Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you so much. Let's turn to Kristen Welker, our White House correspondent. Kristen, we saw the president's taped message a few moments ago. What are you hearing at the White House?
Well, Savannah, a number of White House officials, a number of former White House officials and allies to President Trump are pressuring him to, frankly, go further than he did in that taped statement that was released a short time ago, in which he reiterated those false claims of voter fraud, but did call for peace, urged his supporters not to resort to violence. But I can tell you that there is a push right now to get the president to come out and speak and to say something forceful, to make a strong statement, to essentially say, stand down. And it comes as we are hearing from some of his former officials on Twitter, Alyssa Farah, one of them, who essentially says, I am one of you, to the MAGA world, as she puts it. She says, before I worked for the president, I worked for Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, and she goes on to say, I need you to hear me. The election was not stolen. We lost. Strong statements also from Mick Mulvaney, the former chief of staff here, as well as Kellyanne Conway, one of the former top advisors to President Trump, who are essentially urging the president to come out and to make a strong statement and urging the people who stormed the Capitol to stand down. So that is the scene here. I was just speaking to a number of top officials. I can tell you they are watching these developments unfold. President Trump himself watching these developments unfold, Savannah, and it's not clear that he has any plans or any intentions to come out and speak this evening. But I can tell you that there is a somber mood here at the White House, and frankly, a number of officials have a stricken look on their face as they watch all of this unfold, of course, coming just hours after President Trump addressed a crowd of thousands and essentially reiterated those false claims of fraud, tried to pressure his own vice president, Mike Pence, to take actions that he cannot take under the law to block the election results from being counted and from announcing the winner as Joe Biden. And there is a sense that in that speech, the president was riling up his supporters, and now this is what has come from a day and weeks of a lot of energy toward trying to relitigate this election. So, Savannah, I can just tell you the pressure is mounting here on President Trump to do more.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty extraordinary to hear from former officials who were diehards, who worked for the president until those last moments, to say it's enough, it's over. What about Vice President Pence? Of course, he was over there at the Capitol presiding over the Senate at this time, and the last best information we had was that he was still there, that it was not safe for him to even go that short distance back to the White House. Have you heard anything about his whereabouts, any update?
That is the latest that we know, Savannah, that, of course, he, as well as the members of Congress, the senators there, were, of course, evacuated to safer grounds at the Capitol, but that it wasn't safe for them to leave. And I would just underscore a point that Casey has made, which is that there is a determination to try to see these proceedings through to the end once it is safe to go back and try to do the business of the government to count the Electoral College votes to declare the winner of the presidential election. And so it is our understanding that that is where he continues to huddle. But it's quite remarkable what we witnessed from the vice president today, Savannah. Once these proceedings got underway, we saw the vice president, one of the president's staunchest allies, break with him, really for the first time publicly, and to say that he does not believe that the Constitution gives him the authority to in any way try to block the vote count. And so breaking with the president in that very public way and making it clear to the president, making it clear to the American people that that's how he viewed his role, and that is how he planned to proceed and will proceed once these proceedings get underway. And so a really stark, dramatic development there. And it's also worth noting that the Senate's top Republican, Mitch McConnell, also broke with President Trump today and said flatly that there just was not the type of massive, widespread fraud that the president is trying to suggest that there was, and that essentially the country's democracy will head toward a death spiral if elections are litigated and relitigated in this type of manner. Savannah.
All right, Kristen, stand by. Thank you so much. I want to go to Pete Williams. Pete, we are starting to see some more aggressive action on the part of law enforcement to kind of disperse the crowd. We've seen the crowd diminish. What have you learned about the decision-making that's gone on in terms of how to respond to this afternoon?
Sure. Well, let me come back to that, if I may, and answer the question about the vice president first. The initial thought was, when this all happened, let's get the vice president out of here. The Secret Service, as I understand it, concluded that there really was no safe way to get him out of the building and away, so he remained there. Now he's staying there because the Senate wants to continue. At least the senators in the House want to keep going tonight, and he has to preside. He is required by the Constitution to preside. So I think the reason he's still there is that at first they didn't know what they were going to do but couldn't get him out of there. Now they want to continue with the count, so he has to stay there to preside over it. So that's the answer to that question. Now, we've gotten a lot of people that have asked us, Savannah, and I'm sure many of our viewers have wondered the same thing, why aren't the police making arrests? These people went into the Capitol, they violated a number of different federal laws, they damaged property, they trespassed, they disrupted, they did all kinds of things. Why aren't we seeing more arrests? Now, we don't have a definitive answer to the question of whether there was a strategy or a decision made by the Capitol Police or Metro Police, who were initially on the scene, simply not to do that because they felt they were outmanned. I suspect that's it, that they just felt that their main goal was to try to preserve whatever the safety of the members first. But I think that the feeling that I've gotten from talking to other law enforcement people watching this is, yes, the people in the building were overwhelmed, weren't able to stop and start making arrests. They were severely outnumbered, and that, however, a lot of those people that were there are eventually going to be charged and may not realize this. But, you know, there's pictures like that, the one we're looking at right now. There are video cameras inside the building. There are all these pictures that law enforcement will be going over now and trying to identify these people and run them down and arrest them and charge them with a number of different offenses. So I think it looks odd to think that these people are simply being escorted off the grounds. And I've had law enforcement people say, I can't believe what I'm seeing, that they're not being arrested. But what we're told is charges ultimately will be filed on a lot of these people. Now, clearly, it would be a lot better if they could just arrest them on the spot. But I think the feeling was the law enforcement initially was simply outnumbered.
Well, that I think is the real point. What's really disturbing is that they weren't able to be stopped and thwarted. The chief of police in D.C. said that some of the protesters did use violence against police. But as we've observed as the afternoon has worn on, it is not exactly a surprise that this protest was going on, that there had been talk of this kind of activity. And so, there will be a lot of questions in the coming days about why there wasn't a better response. That's for another day. We're still in a crisis right here. This is the nation's capital on an evening like no other, where protesters were able to breach the security as Congress met in a joint session to perform one of its most sacred constitutional duties, to certify electors, to ensure the peaceful transfer of power to a new president. And instead, what we saw was rioters breach the gates, come through the building, make it onto the Senate floor, the House floor, stroll through Statuary Hall as though they were on a visitor's tour. Congress stopped. The members of Congress evacuated. They are still in a secure location. So as we hit 6 o'clock on the East Coast, there is a curfew going into effect on the streets of Washington, D.C., as law enforcement tries to catch up and get this situation under control. We've heard from the president-elect and we've heard from President Trump. And we now turn to Leon Panetta, who, of course, is the former defense secretary under the Obama administration, a former White House chief of staff going back to the Clinton administration, and a former congressman who knows that building well. Secretary Panetta, I guess just before we get into the security measures, I just want your gut, how you feel at this hour, seeing the images that we've all been watching.
Savannah, the scenes that I've seen today are the most disturbing events that I've seen in my entire public life. I never expected to see rioters take over the Capitol of the United States, stop our democracy from functioning, and basically undermine the very form of government that depends on both order and freedom. And to see that happen is something I thought I would never see in my lifetime.
And the business of the Congress must go on. We're told from our reporting from inside the room that senators and members of Congress are very focused, almost defiant in their feeling that they have an obligation to go on and continue this work, even if it goes late into tonight. What do you know about, without giving away anything, what do you know about the plans that would have been in place for something like this? I mean, I talked about it a little bit with Secretary Napolitano earlier in our coverage, saying, I'm sure you had plans on the shelf for an attack on our Congress. You probably didn't imagine that it would come from inside, from Americans, from our very own people.
Well, as you may know, I signed a letter with all 10 of the former living defense secretaries that raised the concern about the possibility that something like this might raise the issue of using the military in order to change the results of an election, and we cautioned against that. But it was clear at the time that there are those that were going to conduct this kind of protest. The president obviously was saying things to incite what we saw today. Everybody knew that, in fact, something like this was very possible. And I'm a little surprised, very frankly, that sufficient steps were not taken to secure the Capitol and to make sure that something like this did not happen.
And Secretary Panetta, just bring you up to date because the president tweeted about 7 minutes ago, and this is what he said. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. How does that statement strike you?
It strikes me as not only irresponsible, but undermining the very role that he should be playing as President of the United States, which is to make very clear that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, that it violates every principle of law and order that he said he stands for, and further undermines the very democracy that he has sworn to uphold as President of the United States. What he's saying is not helpful to the law enforcement people that are there now, trying to make sure that they clear the Capitol and allow it to get back to the business of our democracy. It only goes to show that ultimately, as he leaves office, he will bear responsibility for what we saw today.
Secretary Panetta, is this a turning point? I mean, after everything that's transpired and, things that have happened that have never happened before, and life just seems to go on as usual. But this is different. Do you feel that this will be a turning point in which members of Congress, your former colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, stand up and say, enough is enough? Or is this just going to be just another day in the Trump administration?
Well, I don't think this can be passed off as just another day. What we saw happen to the Capitol of the United States and what we saw happen in terms of the interruption of our system of government is a serious event. And I worry that if we don't take steps to come together and govern this country, that the scenes we saw today will inspire others to take advantage of the situation. This is a serious moment in our history, and we ought not to just excuse it as just somehow, some kind of protest. A line was crossed today, and that line represents whether or not our democracy is going to function in the future or whether it's going to be held under siege in the future. And the leadership of this country will determine the answer to that question.
And Secretary Panetta, before I let you go, you're the former CIA director, your former Defense Department, the Secretary of Defense. When you think about our adversaries around the world, watching this, watching these scenes, what goes through your mind?
It's a terrible message that's going out because our adversaries will see what we have seen today and just sense it as another sign of weakness on the part of the United States. And I worry that because of those scenes, that our adversaries will use that to take advantage of the United States. This is not a good moment in terms of the image of the United States and the values that we represent. It's a moment where we are very vulnerable to those that want to undermine our democracy.
Secretary Panetta, thank you for your time, sir. We appreciate it. I want to turn to our correspondent, Yasmin Vsugin, who's on the grounds of the Capitol, and we're seeing in the images on your screen that we are starting to see more law enforcement activity. This curfew in Washington, D.C. has been underway for about 10 minutes now. Yasmin, what changes have you witnessed?
Yeah, so Savannah, we walked east to west. We were on the east side when I was talking to you a little bit earlier, and then we walked all the way to the west side of the Capitol. And there's about 3 to 4 separate police lines in trying to disperse the crowd. If you'd asked me 2 hours ago if by 6 p.m. the thousands of people that were here would have been dispersed, I would not have necessarily believed you. But now, 2 hours later, at 6 p.m., there's literally almost nobody here at this point. I mean, yeah, you are seeing a lot of folks still out here and still seeing the police presence, as you can see, pushing us back away from the perimeter of the Capitol, but we're already off the Capitol Hill front lawn. And then, just a little bit earlier, before you came to me, I saw about 25 or so FBI guys walking into the area. Sorry, we just want to make sure that we get out of the way and we're not getting in the way of any of the police activity to make sure they're able to get their jobs done. Obviously, we want to make sure that's the #1 priority here, so I'm stepping away a little bit. But these guys, the D.C. Metro Police, still pushing folks back, wanting everybody here to heed with the 6 p.m. curfew that's now in place in the city, Savannah. And as I mentioned, the FBI, watch out for the bike behind you, the FBI now on site in front of the Capitol building on a day in which, is usually pro forma during an election season, just 2 weeks away from when President-elect Joe Biden will be inaugurated at this very site. And I just want to mention one other note here, Savannah, that I've mentioned throughout the day, but the Capitol was set up for the inauguration already. When we arrived here earlier today, you saw bleachers on both sides of the Capitol. You saw the inauguration balcony in which President-elect Joe Biden on January 20th will walk out and be sworn in as the next president of the United States. Today, that setup, the area in which they have put in place for that inauguration on January 20th, was filled with rioters and protesters. And it was a sight that I don't think any of us could have imagined that we would see. And again, the police trying to push folks back, make sure that protesters, rioters, folks that are here are behind the line, Savannah. So I'll send it back to you for now. But again, there's definitely some more police presence at this point to make sure that the citizens and the folks in this area are abiding by the 6 p.m. curfew, Savannah.
Yeah, this is very much an unfolding situation. Yasmin, you're brave, and we're grateful for you being there as this law enforcement starts to move in and enforce this 6 o'clock curfew and try to get this situation under control. And as we speak, you look at the United States Capitol on this night, you have members of Congress, senators, and Congress members who are sheltered in place, locked down, unable to leave, unable to perform their constitutional duties because of a throng of protesters turned rioters who breached the grounds of the Capitol and stopped democracy. But if I have Casey Hunt with me, they have not stopped it, they have paused it, because there is very much a feeling on Capitol Hill from our sources in the room, where some senators are gathered in the same room watching this coverage, some members of Congress gathered together watching this same coverage. There's a feeling, a defiant feeling, that the business of this country will be done, even at nightfall, no matter what it takes. Andrea Mitchell, you are a longtime correspondent in Washington. It goes without saying that there has never been a night like this. What are your sources telling you about what happens next and whether this sacred duty can be performed by the United States Congress under these circumstances?
Well, I just got a text from Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from Michigan, and you know how long she has been not only in the Hill, but of course before her, her late husband, John Dingell, was the longest-serving member of Congress when he retired, and she then replaced him in the House. And she says, this has been a total nightmare. I was on the floor. I hear the gunshots, smell the tear gas, and I will be damned if he will keep us from doing our job. We will go back and do it tonight. I asked, are you doing it tonight? Does it have to be done on the House floor or in the safe location where we know they are together, they are safe? And she says, it will be done on the House floor. And I said, is this reportable, and can I attribute it to you? And she said, yes. So that is the defiance from a member of Congress, notably from Michigan, which of course has seen the protests storming the Capitol there, the State House. She's very close to Governor Whitmer there, and we know the threats there that the governor has endured. And there is a strong Michigan contingent, we've been told, by law enforcement to some of the groups who are here today. In any case, the defiance of Debbie Dingell, who has a very good check on the pulse of her fellow Democratic caucus members, is, I think, very, very widespread. We heard this earlier from the senators, according to Pete Williams, who was reporting that they also want to get this done tonight. And I think they're going to try to do it no matter how late they stay up. And as you well know, I covered the Hill. When they have deadlines and they have big business to do at the end of a session, they do stay all night. Health care was passed at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and law enforcement seems to be attempting to clear the deck so that that can take place. We'll keep an eye on that. Keep working your sources, Andrea. I want to turn to Republican Congressman Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, who is still at the Capitol and locked down in his office. Sir, first of all, I'm glad to see that you're okay and you're able to call in. What was your experience today?
Well, first of all, there wasn't any shots that was fired in the House chamber. I know guns were drawn. I was right there when they broke the glass. It did sound like gunshots, and for those that haven't heard it, and which I'm glad a lot of people haven't heard gunshots like that, unfortunately I have. I recognized it immediately, and there was definitely tear gas, but the tear gas was in the rotunda, nothing bias. Listen, it was very tense. It should have never happened at all. But our Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms, law enforcement, did a phenomenal job showing restraint and actually keeping the members safe. These guys have families too, and they did their best to protect us. They were strongly outnumbered, which is why I stood there with them, and we made sure that the chamber was completely clear. The members got out, the staff got out, and at the end of the day, the protesters were completely, and I actually want to use the word agitators. The agitators were completely out of line.
Yeah, and Congressman, I mean, you're a Republican, you're a Trump supporter, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were someone who was wanting to object to certifying the elector. So we know where you stand politically. This, it seems to me, is a different issue. You're talking about people breaking the law, coming into the United States Congress and stopping the business of America. Do you feel that what the president said today to those protesters in his tweet and in his video message, is it enough, or do you think that he's still in some way fanning the flames by contending that it's a stolen election?
Listen, people are responsible for their own behavior, first and foremost. You can't blame this on the president or anybody else. You're responsible for your own behavior, full stop. And the president told him to go home, and even he said, I love him. And people are trying to criticize him for saying he loved them, but I wake up every single morning and I say, love the people, love the call. And I love these guys too. That doesn't mean I condone what they did. I went and I talked to a whole bunch of law enforcement that they have a triage center set in the basement of one of our office buildings, and if I said there was 25 or 50 of them, I'd probably be underestimating. And I shook every one of their hands. I told them thank you. Every one of these guys have families. Every one of these guys, or for the most of them, had families. Most of them were married with kids, and they were shaken up. They were shooken up quite a bit. One young man, unfortunately, is probably going to lose his eye, and because he got hit with some object. And I asked him. I said, what happened? And every one of them told me the same thing. He said these separated from the protesters. These guys had evil in their eyes when they came after us. The rest of the protesters continued on their way. These guys broke away. They were there as agitators. And when they started breaking the glass out, I even confronted them at the door, and I said, guys, because I started yelling, don't shoot, don't shoot. And I hollered at the guys at the other side. I said, you almost got shot. You almost got shot. Are you serious? Are you willing to do this? And most of them calmed down a little bit. One of them, he was the agitator. He was the one that was probably the one that got most of them stirred up. Of course, he kept running his mouth, and he's just unreasonable. He's one of the guys you can't be unreasonable or you can't reason with. But we're all, at the end of the day, we have the right to protest, but we don't have the right to destroy public or private property. We don't have the right to go this far. And you should feel strong and be willing to stand your ground for what you believe in. And I believe you have the right to do that. But this is not the America. I've seen this overseas. This is not what we do inside the United States, and this went too far.
Yeah, no question about it. The pictures tell the story. I mean, when you think about now, many of your colleagues have said and communicated that they want to see this process go forward. They want the Congress to perform its duty.
Agreed.
As mentioned, you were one who was going to object to the electors. Is there anything about what has transpired today that makes you reassess that? Not because of perhaps the substance, I mean, whatever your reasons were, those haven't changed, but just because of the tenor and the powder keg that has been unleashed. And, people can lay blame where they want to lay blame. But is there anything about what has transpired that makes you think, you know what, it's time to get on with it? Our position has been known, but this country needs to get on with the peaceful transition.
We're still having the conversation, and I still feel very strongly about our stance. I still believe that there's some real questions about the constitutional authority, about some changes that happened in some of the states. No question about that. And so there's still going to be some electoral votes that are contested too. We do have to get on with our work, but the demeanor to which we present the findings may change. We're still discussing that. We're actually having open discussions among all of us, among both sides right now. But we will move forward with the process. And at the end of the day, this is to make sure that we do have fair and balanced elections, that we have elections moving forward. So anytime we have future elections, what separated us from other democracies is people had faith and they believed in their vote and their election, and they were fair. And that belief isn't there. But what happened today, what transpired today, is no excuse for that. There is no excuse for what happened today, zero. And as I said, there was a lot of peaceful protesters. A lot of them came in from Oklahoma that I knew, and they're all headed home. They weren't part of this. This was a separate group. These were agitators that came there to make as much destruction as possible.
And it's one of those things, because you can have, politics is all about passion and passion for what you believe. Sure. And I always say, if you're not protesting, that's what America's all about. People fought and died for that right.
Right.
But when you...
It's the First Amendment, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. But when you fan the flames, you know, sometimes you can unleash an element that isn't responsible, that are rioters and agitators. And I guess that's kind of where I'm asking you, you know, whether you feel that there has been rhetoric that's irresponsible, that
there's been rhetoric
uncorked
irresponsible on both sides. The rhetoric's been irresponsible from both sides. We've seen it from both sides. I mean, there's been some really big flames that were fanned before President Trump even got into office. Before he was even sworn into office, there was a lot of it going on. We've seen these protests going on, and it's been bubbling. It hasn't been from our side, and that's why I said I have a hard time believing these are actual true Trump supporters, because you haven't seen this from Trump supporters. Trump supporters have been out there too. They've been on the streets. They've been to rallies. They've had conflict with Antifa and the other groups, and it has never went to this point. This is the first time we've ever seen it go to this point. And as I said before, it doesn't make any difference who's fanning the flames. At the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own actions. And the way you choose to act is you should be held responsible for. And I hope everybody that came in there is held responsible, because a lot of people's lives have changed. There's a lot of law enforcement, a lot of Capitol Police and D.C. Police and Sergeant of Arms that came to work today that's going to go home a little bit different. There's a young lady that died because she stormed through the door and an officer had to make a split decision and had to shoot her. And guess what? Their families' lives have changed. His life has got changed because the first time you discharge a weapon, it changes you. It changes you, and it changes you forever. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's some people out there that's lost a loved one too, a daughter, a mother. I don't know how old she was, but there's a family that's going to grieve tonight because of what got out of hand. Yeah. And it should have never ever got to this point. This is a dark day for all of us, and I hope we can all take a deep breath and learn something from this. But we still need to be passionate. You have a right to be passionate about what you believe politically, but we can debate in a better manner than this.
We can. We're better than this. Congressman Mullen, we're glad you're safe. Thank you for your time this evening, sir. Be safe and keep us posted on the plans as Congress tries to get about the business of the American people. And let me turn to Kristen Welker. Kristen, I don't know if we've caught up since the president issued his last tweet. What was the thinking behind that? What are you hearing from the senior officials inside the White House tonight?
Well, Savannah, the tweet comes after a number of senior officials here have been pushing him to go further than that video statement that he released earlier today when he again reiterated the false claims of voter fraud, but did urge these protesters, the mob that gathered outside the Capitol, to be peaceful, not to engage in any violence. And so this tweet seems to be the opposite of what some of his top officials were urging him to do, which was to come out and make a statement point blank and say, stand down. This tweet does what he did at the rally, which is to reiterate those false claims, saying, remember this day forever. It is worth noting it has now been flagged by Twitter saying that it could incite more violence. So that is the backdrop against which we are seeing that tweet come out. So I would anticipate, Savannah, that you are going to continue behind the scenes here to have a number of his top aides try to push him to say more and, quite frankly, to do more. I can tell you that the world is watching. In fact, we're just seeing a tweet come out from Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, who says Canadians are deeply disturbed and saddened by the attack on democracy in the United States, our closest ally and neighbor. So people are watching what is happening as it unfolds here, Savannah, and frankly cannot believe what they are seeing unfold in the nation's capital here in the United States. Now, let me just take a step back and give you a sense of the thinking as this day began. I spoke with a number of top officials who said, look, they saw this as the president and his supporters' last stand, what was going to happen inside the halls of Congress, to air that debate and the dispute that they felt needed to be had about the electoral vote count. They wanted to try to convince President Trump that this was, in fact, his last stand. And the hope was that after today, he would be able to move forward. There wasn't a whole lot of optimism that he would essentially abandon his rhetoric, but that supporters would feel as though at least the debate had been had in the halls of Congress. But White House officials acknowledging privately, look, he has lost, and that ultimately he's going to have to acknowledge that. Savannah.
All right, and we just got a statement from Senator Romney that was posted, and let me just read a little part of it. He said, what happened at the U.S. Capitol today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. The statement of Senator Mitt Romney earlier today, and you can just imagine behind closed doors those senators that are sheltering in place together, senators who disagree and have found themselves in this situation. You can imagine the conversations that might be going on there. And Casey Hunt, our Capitol Hill correspondent, the more pressing conversation is what's next? How can they continue this work that was supposed to take place January 6th, the certifying of the electoral vote? Can it continue tonight? Will it continue tonight?
The short answer, Savannah, is that members are determined that it will. The logistics of this are still being finalized because obviously we've never been in this situation before, but this has been the focus of the conversations. There's an expectation that they may be able to get back into the Senate chamber sooner rather than later. There's a push from Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, to do that, to show that they will not be cowed by what happened today, by people invading the U.S. Capitol in what both Mitt Romney and the former President George W. Bush called an insurrection. That's a pretty specific choice of words from those two top Republicans, obviously not supporters of President Trump based on all of this. But there is that determination to make this happen. Now, it's possible it won't actually be on the Senate floor. We obviously are dealing with the security situation there, sweeping all of the nooks and crannies there, all of the people that were in here. It takes time, and obviously no one wants to go into an unsafe situation. So there have been some different discussions of how to make this happen. But I think certainly the people that I am texting with, talking to, are confident they're going to find some way to demonstrate to the American people that the business of the Congress is going to go on, even in spite of all of this. Savannah.
Casey Hunt, thank you so much. Our coverage continues as we look at Washington, D.C. tonight. On a night like no other, the United States Capitol is locked down. Protesters stormed the building today, stopping the business of Congress at a critical moment, the moment when under the Constitution they're to certify the electoral votes of the election and ensure the peaceful transfer of power. We are going to turn over our coverage. NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt just ahead. Stay with NBC as we continue to cover this breaking story throughout the night.
This is an NBC News special report.
And breaking news tonight, the deadly siege on Congress as an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol. We've seen shocking images of chaos, rioters rushing past barricades and police up the Capitol steps, forcing their way inside. Both the House and the Senate evacuated. Lawmakers moved to safe locations. The invaders roaming the abandoned Senate floor, one hanging from the balcony. Police with guns drawn inside the House. The violence erupting, one woman fatally shot outside the Capitol. Improvised explosive devices found. Several people injured. Offices vandalized. Windows smashed. The National Guard called in to quell the unrest, with that city now under curfew. The breach abruptly halting a joint session of Congress just as Republicans launched a last-ditch effort to overturn President-elect Biden's victory in the Electoral College. This unrest breaking out just after President Trump spoke at a rally near the White House, stoking the crowd by falsely claiming he won the election. Later, in a taped message, the president still baselessly saying the election was stolen, but telling rioters to go home. All of it coming just as Democrats win control of the Senate after the historic election in Georgia. A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage. I want to welcome you back to NBC News coverage of the siege at the U.S. Capitol. Right now, police in Washington enforcing a curfew, driving rioters from the streets and Capitol grounds after securing the inside from those pro-Trump intruders who occupied the Capitol for several hours. Officials telling us a short time ago that one person shot inside the Capitol by law enforcement has died. All this taking place as the House and Senate met to formally count the certified electoral ballots that will make Joe Biden the next president. Our Casey Hunt is on Capitol Hill. Casey, bring us up to date.
Lester, just absolutely stunning images today here at the Capitol as protesters overran the Capitol and multiple law enforcement agencies had to be called in after a number of them not only breached the building but breached the very floor of the House and of the Senate as they were conducting this business of trying to count the Electoral College votes, normally a very straightforward process that only takes about a half an hour, that would name Joe Biden as president-elect. This, of course, occurring after President Trump held a rally with tens of thousands of people outside of the White House. And the images inside the building were pretty unreal. There were protesters that were on the walls of the Capitol, as well as gunshots at one point. Watch. Tonight, stunning images as rioters supporting President Trump overrun the Capitol, scuffling with police. On the floor of the House, officers with guns drawn, with protesters just outside the door. Here you see rioters trying to break down a door, and you hear a gunshot. Over in the Senate, protesters breaching what's supposed to be the highly secure Senate floor, abruptly stopping the counting of electoral votes. Some taking photos on the Senate dais, others shouting and pushing past officers to get inside. Elsewhere, this man sitting with his feet up behind a desk in Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office. Police placing the Capitol on lockdown.
A riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police.
Members of Congress rushing to take shelter, some wearing gas masks.
We were just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get gas masks that are under our seats.
It began just after that massive pro-Trump rally. Tens of thousands gathering near the White House to protest the expected declaration of Joe Biden's Electoral College victory.
There is the American flag, and beneath it, these crowds of people now who have stormed, trying to make their wishes known.
The group then marching to the Capitol, many just standing on the steps outside, others wandering in the rotunda, some scaling down the building. At one point, an armed standoff. Police say one person was shot. Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger describing to us how she got out of the building.
There were people banging on the doors of the floor of the House of Representatives. It took multiple efforts for us to be able to make our way safely and then depart the Capitol. It's deeply, deeply disturbing what we saw at the U.S. Capitol today.
Top House Republican Kevin McCarthy condemning what he was seeing.
This is so un-American. I condemn any of this violence. This is not the American way. This is not protected by the First Amendment. This must stop now.
Multiple Democratic and Republican lawmakers urged President Trump to appear on camera to tell the protesters to leave. Instead, he later tweeted, "I'm asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue." The president-elect then imploring President Trump to speak.
At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
By about 4:15 this afternoon, this message from the White House.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you.
See that statement not going far enough for many on Capitol Hill tonight.
That's right, Lester. Many Republicans urging the president to go farther in trying to ensure calm, to calm this situation down and to make it easier to have a peaceful transfer of power to Joe Biden. Lester.
All right, Casey Hunt, thank you. And one of those caught in today's assault was Congressman Mike Gallagher, a Wisconsin Republican. He joins us tonight on the phone. First of all, Congressman, are you someplace safe and well?
I am. Yeah, we're kind of sheltering in place here, but I honestly never thought I'd be barricading the doors and watching what I saw happen today in the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, some of the images are stunning, and you saw them firsthand. Can you walk us through what happened? I know the Senate and House had split apart for the purposes of debating some objections. When did you realize something was amiss?
Well, it was almost simultaneous with the debate over the certification of Arizona's electors when the protesters started to gather at the foot of the Capitol, and things quickly descended into violence. You know, you heard multiple flashbangs being deployed, which was presumably the Capitol Police trying to get the protesters to back off. The protesters were violently clashing with the police. Earlier in the day, one of the buildings have been evacuated when protesters breached the perimeter, and then somehow they breached the security perimeter of the Capitol itself, and they started breaking down windows, running amok in Statuary Hall, eventually got onto the Senate floor and the House floor, and then, you know, the vice president was evacuated by Secret Service, and then someone was shot, and it's my understanding that that person has died. I mean, that is the cost of what has happened today. I mean, someone died in the United States Capitol, in America today. I mean, this is unacceptable. And I think, if nothing else, the objectors need to stop playing this dangerous game. We need to reconvene tonight when order is restored. The objectors need to stand down. We need to certify the results of the election. And Donald Trump is ultimately going to have to concede. That's the only way we avoid stuff like this in the future. As a Republican, it bums me out that we lost the presidential election, but such is life. When you lose, you take a second, you look in the mirror, and you figure out how you can do better next time, and that's what we need to do as a party right now.
So, Congressman, it appears they have secured the Capitol now, but that doesn't change the belief in the people we're seeing here that this election was somehow stolen, and the president probably didn't help things today by his remarks. So where does that leave us tomorrow and the next day?
Well, I think the prudent move, once we all say it together that the election's over and we support the peaceful transition of power, it's not dismiss the concerns of election fraud that we've seen in multiple states. I think many states, including my home state of Wisconsin, need their state legislatures to do a version of what Florida did after the 2000 election. There were certainly changes that were made at the last second in the midst of the pandemic, and we've had a massive increase in absentee balloting. And I think it's fair for the legislatures to take a step back and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, and here's how we can give our citizens confidence in the integrity of the election. But that's a separate question than the question of whether Congress should or even has the authority to overturn the results of the state election. I mean, I don't see a reading of that anywhere in the Constitution. That is a recipe for chaos. It's certainly not a conservative reading of the Constitution. It's a highly progressive one. And I just don't believe the federal government should have that power. That power belongs to the states and to the people.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, we're glad you're well. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As you heard, all this happened as Congress was in the middle of certifying, not actually certifying, the votes had been certified, but they were counting the Electoral College vote for President-elect Joe Biden and debating objections to that vote. Let's get more on that from NBC's Kristen Welker.
Those stunning images of a mob storming the Capitol followed another extraordinary moment.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress.
Vice President Mike Pence presiding over the special session of Congress in which the electoral votes are counted and the winner of the presidential election declared. And for the first time, Pence publicly breaking with the president.
Are you going to overturn the election results today?
Refusing the president's demands that he unlawfully overturn electoral votes for Biden. Pence releasing a letter saying, "My oath to support and defend the Constitution constrains me from claiming unilateral authority to determine which electoral votes should be counted and which should not." That letter released just minutes after President Trump called out Pence multiple times.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us.
At a massive rally across from the White House.
So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to.
Later, tweeting Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. Today, again, pushing false claims of widespread fraud.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
And today, for the first time, the top Senate Republican, Mitch McConnell, blasting the president and those rejecting Joe Biden's Electoral College win.
If this election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral.
Still, at least 13 Republican senators and dozens of House Republicans were poised to raise objections to the results in at least 6 states unless a commission is created to audit the election.
What does it say to the nearly half the country that believes this election was rigged if we vote not even to consider the claims of illegality and fraud in this election?
But shortly after the debate began, those protesters started storming in. And shortly after that moment, all the debate ended. They were going alphabetically through the states and never made it past Arizona. Lester.
Kristen, we're hearing that some in the White House are now asking the president to make a more forceful statement. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's absolutely right, Lester. I can tell you that some top White House staff are urging the president to respond strongly to what transpired today. Now, officials don't know if he's actually going to say anything else or issue a more forceful statement. And some Trump allies outside the White House are frustrated with his reluctance to do so. They had wanted him to go further in his remarks and to say something live, not what he released on tape. But the president is hesitant to aggressively push back against his own supporters.
All right.
Lester.
Kristen Welker at the White House. Thank you. President-elect Joe Biden forcefully condemned today's assault. He called on President Trump to step up and demand an end to the siege. Our Jeff Bennett joins us now. Jeff, what else did Mr. Biden have to say?
Hey, Lester, the president-elect condemned the actions of the rioters as an insurrection, saying their behavior bordered on sedition. He also called out President Trump for inciting the violence, and Biden also talked about the challenges ahead. Take a look.
The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency.
Now, in recent weeks, we've seen Joe Biden increasingly step into this apparent leadership void, delivering addresses to the nation about the pandemic, about the tough economy, and now this crisis in our democracy. And asked by reporters, Biden said he wasn't concerned about his own safety, his own security, or even his own inauguration, which is set to happen at the U.S. Capitol outside in 2 weeks' time. Lester.
Yeah, a lot of conversation about that in light of what has happened here. All right, Jeff, thank you. And we noted that curfew now underway in Washington. Police have been working to disperse the rioters from the Capitol and the area. Gabe Gutierrez is on the ground for us there. Gabe, what's the latest? Are people beginning to move along and disperse?
Lester, it's an extremely eerie scene out here, out in front of the Capitol. Earlier, there was all this chaos. Now it is extremely quiet. As we were coming here a short time ago, driving through this area and walking through this area, we heard loudspeakers blaring that a curfew was in effect. A great deal of National Guard members were also here, and they were also on very high alert. Lester, it's incredible to see the Capitol just like this as night falls. The question will be, will there be more protesters that stick around? But at this point, I can tell you, as you can see from the street behind me, people have emptied out. There doesn't appear to be a lot of protesters here remaining. But it was incredible to witness this earlier today. Lester, I've covered an incredible amount of protests over the last few months, past few years. And to see these protesters breach the Capitol, I spoke by phone, and as I was making my way here, to a Republican congressman who was negotiating with some of these rioters inside the Capitol as they were trying to make their way in. He said it was just an incredible sight, un-American, and so many people around the country right now are asking, how could this happen? How could these rioters be allowed to breach the walls of the United States Capitol? But again, right now, a curfew is in effect and the streets are quiet. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you very much. Let's turn to Republican Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. He's on the phone as well. Congressman, thank you for being well. I assume that you're someplace now safe?
Yes, sir. We're all in good standings.
As we noted, the Senate and House had split apart to begin dealing with some of these objections. You yourself have objected to some of the state certifications. Will that process now end as the approval of the vote resumes?
You know, I think you probably hear a different tone from both sides. We should be. I mean, while everybody is responsible for their own actions, we can also learn to debate better than this. And at the end of the day, we still have a constitutional authority with the electoral vote for January 6th. And so as soon as the perimeter is secure, I believe we'll be going back to work.
Will you drop your objections?
No, the objection is still there. To contest the electoral vote is still my constitutional authority and my obligation. And so to contest it is something I feel very strongly about. It's not political. It's something I feel like is my constitutional authority to do so. And so we will do that, but we can do it in a more civilized manner. And I think that goes for all of us. Listen, a lot of the rhetoric that's been given from both sides over the last 5 years as why everybody is responsible for their own actions, it's bubbled to this point, and this should have never happened. This is a dark day, and this kind of action is not acceptable from anybody. I don't care what your reason is. This is never acceptable.
Do you think your actions, those of others who have challenged these electoral votes, in some way help fuel what played out today?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. That's almost ridiculous because we've heard both sides have real bad rhetoric for 5 years. We've seen protests going on for 5 years. And to be quite honest, we've never seen this from Trump supporters before. They've been out there. They've confronted. They've had interactions with Antifa and other groups before. We've had Trump rallies. We've seen them have rallies before, and we've never seen violence. We've never seen this before, not from Trump supporters, and so I wouldn't even call this really protesters. There was agonizers that went into the protesters. I had the opportunity to go and visit with a lot of our men and women that stood guard, that were putting their life on the line to make sure that members and staff gets to go home safe at some point, and they have families too. And I went down to the triage center, and there may have been 25 or 50 of them, I don't know, but they were bloody and bruised, and one young man I'm sure is going to lose his eye, and they were shaken up. And I asked them what happened, and they said there was a group that broke away from the protesters, and they had evil in their eyes. These weren't just your normal protesters; they had evil in their eyes, and there wasn't just one or two or three of them that said that to me. There was multiple ones that I talked to, but at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own actions, regardless. We're responsible for our behavior, and I think President Trump did a good job by telling them to go home, and then he even told them that he loved them, and a lot of people want to make a big deal about that. But listen, every morning I wake up and I say, "Love the people, love the call." I love these people too, but what they did today was inexcusable, and unfortunately even a young lady lost her life because of it, and there's two lives that changed there. The officer that discharged his weapon, I don't care who you are, the first time you discharge your weapon, it takes a part of you, and there's going to be, and so his life has been changed, and there's some people that love that young lady. I don't know her age, but I know she had to have family, and there's a family that's broken today because our behavior got out of line, and we are better than that. We don't do that.
Congressman Mullen, we're glad you're safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
The world is watching as these chaotic scenes play out. A number of world leaders calling on President Trump to condemn the violence. Richard Engel is in London with a global reaction. Richard, it was fascinating to hear some of the things coming from overseas, the kind of things that have come from this country and other times.
Well, by now, Lester, there have been dozens of reactions from world leaders, and they have been condemning what has happened. There have been expressions of shock, expressions of horror, and they are all saying that this was an attack on democracy. Here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson tweeted out that it is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. Germany's foreign minister said the enemies of democracy will be pleased at these unbearable images. The leader of the Secretary General of NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance, said that shocking scenes in Washington, the outcome of this democratic election must be respected. And around the world, leaders were placing blame directly on President Trump. The Prime Minister of Sweden tweeted out that, one more, President Trump and many members of Congress have a great responsibility for what is happening now. A spokesman for the President of South Africa simply tweeted, "Pray for America."
All right, Richard, thank you. I want to turn now to our Frank Thorpe, who's also at the Capitol. He tweeted some stunning video of intruders roaming free on the Senate floor today. Frank, tell us some of the things you've seen and observed.
Yeah, Lester, I mean, I just have to say, I cannot stress enough what a stunning and surprising and shocking scene it was to walk into the gallery above the Senate floor and see the dozen or so rioters who had made it onto the Senate floor. The Senate floor is one of the most historic places that it handles the legislative work for senators, and it is incredibly locked down. Not only is the Capitol locked down, there are multiple levels of security to get into the Capitol every day. But the Senate chamber, the Senate floor, is one of the most sacred rooms in the Capitol. And to see these rioters on the floor was a stunning situation. I have to say, Lester, one of the things that I had been told by aides in the last couple of weeks is that they were worried by the calls by President Trump to have people come to the Capitol and to gather outside the Capitol. They were worried that something like this could happen, and it did. And it's just this, I cannot express the unprecedented nature of the rioters coming into the Capitol, not having gone through security, and storming the floor like they did.
Yeah, you and I were on the air live when those images first came in of that scene from the Senate, and I think both of us were left speechless for a moment. Quite extraordinary. Frank Thorpe, thank you for your reporting. I want to bring in our political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Boy, Chuck, what does this say about a division in America? This thing may be, being put to rest tonight, but the feelings are still very strong, and they are out there.
A couple weeks ago on Meet the Press, Lester, I started off and I just simply asked the question, is this the 1850s or the 1950s, talking about the divides in America? And frankly, I was referring to sort of, in the 1950s, we had the Red Scare, you had Joseph McCarthy, but we shut that down, right? We somehow came together and we shut that down as a country. In the 1850s, obviously, the divide in this country culminated in a civil war. And so you now look at an event like today, and making a comparison to the 1850s is suddenly, no longer hyperbole, which some of us, I think, were accused of over the last few years. The sad thing about all this, Lester, is that, well, we're all shocked by what we witnessed today. Are we that surprised? We've all been concerned this moment was coming, that we had a president of the United States that was fomenting this, that he had a propaganda machine, frankly, behind him that helped him push this. So I do think this is gut check time. We still have elected leaders in this country, I think, who would like to keep this republic standing. President Trump's actions cannot go unanswered. You've heard various people talk impeachment. You've heard some people bring up the 25th Amendment. I don't think these are ideas that are just being tossed around. These should be serious conversations. There's a lot of senators right now locked up with Vice President Pence right now. Because you got to ask yourself, is the president mentally fit at this point and has the temperament to handle the presidency even for the next 13 days? What he did today and his actions as they continue all night tonight have to call those things into question. So these conversations, I think, are taking place, and they're real.
And some of those things you mentioned, obviously very emotional, and many people would have called them alarmists weeks ago, perhaps not tonight. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss is with us as well. Michael, there's 2 more weeks left in this presidency. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but where is this going?
It's going in ways that are very ominous, Lester. This is a day I hoped I would never live to see. We saw a terrorist attack on the United States Congress and the United States Capitol, and it was instigated by the President of the United States, who today at midday told this big mob, march up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol and take back our country, and stop the counting of the ballots that will lead to an election that he charged was stolen. And once they were with guns and other weapons and committing violence in the Capitol, he made a video in the Rose Garden saying, "We love you and you're very special." We have never seen anything like that in more than 2 centuries of American history. I hope we never do again, but it has to stop. He's in office for 2 more weeks. We can't live with the possibility that this kind of thing will spread and get worse.
We've all seen things today that may make us shudder. Michael, thank you. The question many asking tonight, how did this assault on the Capitol happen? Why wasn't it more secure when Trump supporters have been threatening similar actions for months? Let's go to Tom Costello with that.
For weeks, right-wing online chatter had discussed just this scenario. The president had called for protesters to march on Capitol Hill. Washington's mayor had called out the National Guard to protect the city streets. Every D.C. police officer was on the job.
Today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior.
The question tonight, why weren't Capitol Police prepared for this?
We need to ask questions about why it was or was not designated a national special event and why the security around it was insufficient. 2,300 officers make up the Capitol Police Force. Today, they appeared to be on the defensive, retreating as the crowd pushed forward, forced to pull their guns in the House chambers. But none of the kind of aggressive tactics police used against mostly peaceful protesters last June in front of the White House after the killing of George Floyd.
I would have never anticipated that we would lose control of both the Capitol and the floors. So maybe the first inkling that was different is how hateful and spiteful and violent this crowd was.
Tonight, Capitol Police and D.C. Police are getting help from neighboring communities, neighboring police departments in Maryland and Virginia, as well as the National Guard in Virginia, D.C. and Maryland. Tonight, it is all hands on deck here in the D.C. area. Lester?
All right, Tom Costello, thanks. NBC's Andrea Mitchell has covered Congress and the White House for many years. I think we all agree we've not seen anything quite like the way this day has played out, Andrea. But I want to raise the question with you that I did with Michael a moment ago, Bechelos, about what the next 2 weeks could bring.
Well, it is so hard to predict. I think there will be censure, some action taken, certainly by the House members. You're seeing tonight one Republican from Washington State, Kathy McMorris Rogers, saying that she will no longer object. She was one of the objectors. I know you talked to the other congressmen who will still object, but they have to rethink how much responsibility they had for what happened today. And
Andrea, what does this mean? Will this be an easier or harder Biden presidency because of this, at least in the beginning?
I think the poison in the atmosphere makes it so much more difficult coming in. He has so much healing to do, but there is a real a signal, at least from Mitch McConnell, that things might be different. There may be some way to come together in the middle.
All right. Andrea, thank you. So here we are at the end of an extraordinary and chaotic day in the history of our country. We've seen an assault on our democracy like we've never seen. The normally routine exercise of certifying, or in this case, counting the votes of a presidential election turning into a life-threatening attack on one of the pillars of our country. Gunfire, a woman dies, others wounded, members of Congress in gas masks, hiding under their desks, saying prayers. The U.S. Capitol occupied and under siege. The questions will linger for a long time. On a very basic level, just how could an angry mob breach what should have been one of the most secure buildings in the world? Why did it take so long for authorities, including President Trump himself, to respond? And what responsibility will the president ultimately bear for what happened today? Tonight, members of Congress are vowing to get back to the process of certifying the election of Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. Despite what we've been through today, our democracy is strong. And there will be a transfer of power exactly 2 weeks from today, right there at the U.S. Capitol. I want to go now to Casey Hunt, who can give us a little more color as we now a good hour past the curfew, what's happening at the Capitol itself. Casey?
Lester, good evening to you. And as we turn into the evening here at the Capitol, the attitude here is one of resolve. It has been an incredibly difficult day at the U.S. Capitol. I've covered the Capitol for over a decade on and off, and none of us who have been here in that time have ever seen anything like this. I think it has rattled people quite deeply, both members of Congress and also the many hundreds of aides and reporters who also work in this complex, that something like this was able to happen. But right now, members of Congress are still in their secure locations, but they are determined that the business of the government is not going to stop just because this has happened. I have been talking privately with members of the House, members of the Senate who are in those rooms, people in both parties, and the universal sense is we need to move forward. We need to demonstrate to the country that our government can still function even though something like this has happened. And of course, the business that they were conducting was counting the Electoral College votes that would ultimately ratify Joe Biden's election as our next president of the United States. And that business, normally, we hardly even notice that it happens. It usually takes about a half an hour. It's almost never a newsworthy event. It is one of the oldest traditions here at the Capitol, but not one that really has ever been disputed. And when we got here today, we knew that it was going to be a historic day because there were Republicans planning to object to some of those votes, planning to object to counting them. And that process had started, and you and I were speaking on the air at that time when the objection was heard, and when these two chambers split apart as the process dictates, members of the Senate went back to the Senate chamber to debate whether or not those votes should have been counted. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, his critics would say that he didn't speak out soon enough, but he did speak out today, and he said that if there was not a stop to these objections, that the country's democracy would be in a death spiral. And I'm not sure that anyone really understood at the time how those words would echo through the day, because just minutes later, McConnell and other senators were evacuated off the Senate floor as protesters breached not just the Capitol building, but the very chamber itself, and put a stop to that business of government. It also happened in the House of Representatives, where people grabbed gas masks from under their chairs, where protesters were hanging off the walls. They were sitting at the dais. In one instance, there was a picture of someone who had literally put his feet up on one of the desks. These are not places normally where the general public even has easy access to. You're supposed to be screened. The magnitude of this breach, just absolutely incredible. But at this hour, Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, put out a statement saying they are going to convene the House tonight. They feel it's that important. I'm speaking with senators who are also saying something similar will happen there. So we're waiting to see how the logistics of this will play out. Obviously, it's very important that they sweep the area, that they ensure that nothing was left behind that could be dangerous for lawmakers as they try to go about their business. But right now, at this hour, the resolve is the business of the U.S. government will go on. Lester.
Casey, thank you very much. And as we cross into the 7 o'clock Eastern hour, Savannah Guthrie joins me now. We have seen them move actually very rapidly to clear out the Capitol after all this, but still, as Casey points out, a lot to be secured inside before they can move on.
Well, yeah, moved rapidly after the 6 o'clock curfew went into effect, but there were those hours after this afternoon, Lester, when I think all of us were wondering, where is the response?
Yeah.
Why have these protesters / rioters been permitted to go into the Capitol? And then, they were there past where legal protests are allowed to take place for many, many hours. So we'll continue to ask those questions, but this is the scene in Washington tonight where the curfew is under effect now for 1 hour, 7 o'clock Eastern, as Lester mentioned. The Congress planning to convene in some form or fashion tonight to continue its business, to continue the business of the American people, and continue the official certification of electoral votes. And whether that will be at the joint session of Congress, whether it will be able to take place on the Capitol grounds, that's something we are waiting to hear. But we've heard from the leadership that, yes, it will go on tonight. So it's going to be a late one. Joining us now, Yasmin Vasugian, outside the Capitol. And Yasmin, you've been walking all over the grounds and seen how this protest, the waves have risen and now in some degree receded. What is the latest you're seeing now?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah, as you were coming to me, you talked about, some people are going to be asking the question of where's the response? Why are people able to breach the Capitol grounds? And this is the response now. This is what we are seeing now.